Very expressive without saying a word.
Yeah, let's tell my husband. You can say it.
Good to go? All right. I'll call the meeting to order. Welcome to the school, MSAD 51 School Board meeting, which is mostly a workshop. Today is Monday, February 13th, 2023. Call the meeting to order. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Everybody is here except for Avery. Okay. So we do have an item for action based on our last meeting where we went over the short-term facilities plan, and we don't need to rehash a lot of that, although if you've got questions, we can bring them up here. And Scott did prepare the numbers as far as whether we leased or looked at a purchase option. So Scott, can you take us through that?
Sure. We saw what the leases were at the last meeting. It was like $1,250,000 total for over the 5-year period. If we were to purchase the unit outright, it would be close to $1.7 million if we were to purchase it outright. But that still wouldn't take care of any of the site work or the setup. All of those other capital pieces would still remain the same. And so we were between 1.7, and then that's just for the Schiavi style, which is more like a modular that's sectioned, and delivered from, out of state, not built the same as something that's still built on site, such as a 2x6 building, built more like a home or a school might be. And when we looked at the home or a school, that would be about $2.1 million to build one that was, a 12-room, but built as a modular on site that could be taken apart and moved to a different location. So the question comes up, is it an asset or a liability at the end of the useful life of the modular that we would have here? And that really depends on, the length of time. If we're going to lease these for 5 years, my recommendation is to not purchase them outright and stay with a lease, and they get funded in the general fund. Otherwise, if we buy it outright, we'd have to basically use our capital account in order to buy that outright. Which would significantly deplenish that. And also at the end of the day, you would have to pay to move it, and as we saw, those costs were significant to move that to another location. So that would be my recommendation, Jason.
Okay. And
One other thing?
Yeah.
Is that we're also applying for state subsidy on the modulars, and the state subsidy, they reimburse you for the leases on a square footage basis if you can get that approved. If we buy it outright, it doesn't offer us the same opportunity to do that or to apply and try to get those funds.
all right, thoughts from others? Scott and I and Jeff talked about this. I think it's a little hard to justify buying them outright with that thought that it's really questionable whether we end up with an asset after paying 1.7 versus 1.25, and then the way that it straps us, having to dig into our own capital and not being able to amortize it in the same way as if we did a lease. I guess I'm a little hesitant to make that investment. The whole thing being that hopefully we have our new school in 5 or 6 years, and that this is the wise path to take, I guess, leasing.
Yeah, I think if we were looking at, 10 years, we might be looking at this differently, but I really don't believe we're looking at 10 years on a school building, so.
Thoughts from others?
I just wanted to thank you, Scott, for putting those numbers together because, I know it's some questions that I've received from the community and kind of pros and cons of the two options, so I really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks, Ann.
I was leaning towards the way that Mike and Vanessa had mentioned last meeting, but I think it was a worthwhile exercise to go through. Okay.
And
But-
is there an opportunity after, a few years go by and we have a better longer term view on where and when we might be able to build, to roll it, to lease, to purchase? I don't know if that would make sense.
There's an opportunity to do that down the road, so it doesn't prohibit you down the road. We would just have that conversation with Schiavi, who would be leasing these through. And that would literally provide us with that same opportunity down the road to do that. So
Okay, so it's not off the table.
It wouldn't be off the table. The other thing is if you were to buy them outright, you still have the issue of like, moving the ones at Mabel I. Wilson School, and we're able to kind of negotiate a lease with Schiavi to have these moved, and lease the other ones. So, and we still have time on the other leases for the 3 that are at the middle school and the 2 that are at Mabel I. Wilson School, which have significant leases on them, so, and balances that.
Good question, Leanne. Thank you. All right, do I hear a motion?
I'll move to approve the short-term facilities plan as presented.
Thank you, Mike. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you, Vanessa. Further discussion? All in favor? Gotta be quick over there. Hold on. All right, unanimous. Leanne, what did you want to say?
I was just gonna confirm, are we approving the costs that for the Mabel I. Wilson modular number 2 specifically? We're approving that, I have the
Yes.
PDF open.
Yep, you're approving the whole plan. Obviously,
Playground,
if
all of it.
the budget were not to pass in June, we would still be operating off of the last proposed budget that the board puts forward. But we are acting on the plan, and that includes the cost and signing a contract with the leasing company for the modulars.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
I voted because I agree, but I just wanted to confirm that.
Yeah, we need to move
question.
forward on those fairly soon so that we can get them built. They're new units. They'll be built and then shipped up to Maine. And as I mentioned before, they'll come in 6 sections, which will be in the parking lot, and then put together to create 12 classrooms with bathrooms. So we really need to get that rolling now.
Okay, so it's the plan dated February 6th. Perfect.
Can you take us through the various scenarios, though? What we are committing to these leases,
Yes.
but that cost is going to be in next year's budget. So
There'll
how
be-
does that work if
Yeah.
the budget failed,
Hmm?
but we're still on the hook for that money? How does that work?
Like everything else in the budget, we'd have to figure it out, right? It's, you have a $250,000 lease, which will be in the general fund budget. So that'll be the cost of the lease of the modulars, of that particular modular. The capital cost will come out of our capital reserve, which won't have any impact on taxes because it's already reserve money that we set aside. So we won't be raising taxes for that money to do the site work, the setup, and the other pieces. So, and as Jeff mentioned, you work off the last budget that was approved by the board till you do pass a budget. So,
Just to point out, though, that we are digging into our reserves, which takes away from other things that we
Yep.
can do.
yeah, absolutely. There's, as we talked about tiering the debt, and I mentioned that before, that because we weren't able to have a successful referendum, we now have to start digging into our undesignated fund balance in order to fund those capital items. So, which doesn't allow us to defer, to basically buy down the debt which we had in our previous financing plan.
Very good, thank you. All right, anything else on that before we move on?
Seems like a proper transition to the next step.
Yep, there we go. All right, so next item on the agenda is the workshop, which is the bulk of why we're here tonight. Well, so let's see here. So the purpose of tonight is to begin to define the process we will use for a future building project, to share lessons learned from the previous referendum, and to weigh the time and cost of various parts of the new process. Everything that we reopen and rehash obviously has a cost to it, and we'll have to weigh that, how much of it we want to reopen. So we do have a rough agenda here tonight. Before we get into the details, I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge what a tough and potentially emotional topic we are discussing here tonight. This project is big stuff. This school, its location, its function, and its significant cost affect people, real people in real ways. We have folks whose kids will go here every day for years and want the best and most convenient approach in every way. We have people that have no kids in the system on fixed incomes that can't fathom how they can afford any increase in tax burden or other associated inconveniences to their town or neighborhood. We have people whose families have been here forever and contributed significantly to making this community the wonderful place that it is. And we have newcomers who might lack that history but want to continue to improve and invest in our community. We have people who have spent a few minutes reviewing this project and people that have invested hundreds, potentially thousands of hours into it, some of them volunteers. I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that these are tough conversations on a tough topic with varied opinions and varied priorities. What I am sure of is that any project will not be perfect for every person in every situation. However, we should not let perfect be the enemy of good. I am also sure with the help of this community, we can put together a project that will gain broad support and continue the excellence in education that we've come to expect. So with all of that in mind, I'd like to ask us all to try to share our views and our ideas and feelings in a professional and respectful way at this meeting and as we navigate this multi-year project. So that's expectation. So our target audience here tonight, we don't have an enormous public here, but I know there's a lot of people watching at home. Dave, thank you for coming. The target audience tonight is the board. So just as a reminder, so board workshop, we will take public comment later in the workshop, and we certainly want to hear from everybody. I just wanted to set expectations tonight properly. This is a preliminary meeting in the process, and this is really our first substantive dive into the project since the referendum failure in November. So that said, we have our rough agenda that we put together. So the first thing I thought, I've gotten comments from board members and a fair number of people, and I thought maybe it'd be helpful if we went through a history and timeline of how we got here. I've asked Jeff and Scott to jump in and add what they can. And Tyler Barter from Oak Point is here, and he will add what he can as well. But so we put together a very rough document that Jeff can share, and it basically starts at the beginning. And how did we get here? Everything that we should do. And then as we go through this, I think this board can add to it. We can ask and poll community members. I was thinking of reaching out to our previous chair and previous vice chair that were integral to the project up to this point and asking them to add into it. But I think this timeline in history could be the template for a big piece of our website as we move forward. So I think our previous website, we had a ton of information there, but still not enough. So I'm thinking that this history, this timeline, could be live links to all of the things that people could go and support, you know, or click on and see the supporting documentation rather. So there it is. So we started back at the beginning at 1820. Maine is a safe and great place to live, but it was a secret. And then moving
we're going
forward.
way back.
Oh yeah, we started early, yeah. We can fill in as much as we want.
How much was that school in the beginning?
That was a while back. I don't know what enrollment was back then.
Jason, I just want to apologize. That was an emergency call. It goes through regardless if my phone's on silent. Sorry.
It was one of your ICE people
Yep.
that breaks through, yeah, one of
Yes.
your favorites. Yeah.
Sorry.
Yep.
And then going off from there, just to go back a little bit, not as far as Jason just went back, but to 1967, when the SAD officially started, SAD 51. We're actually, I think we might be the longest functioning SAD now in the state, in Maine, since the Sinclair Act. But anyway, starting in 1967, there's 1,280 students. I'm going to go through every single year. No, I'm just kidding. But you can see the ups and downs. There was increasing enrollment from 67 through roughly, I mean, there's a year or two that are off on some of these, but to 1977, and then there was a decrease in enrollment from 1978 going all the way through about 1991. Then 1991, there was the beginning of what became a fairly significant increase in the SAD, and if you follow it back down to this column, you'll see it goes all the way up to 2,421 students in the year 2000, 2001. And then right after that began a decrease, which started in 2002, or 2001-2, and went all the way until 2016-17, and then we have begun another increase. And this really follows what Rebecca Wandell, who has done the three most recent enrollment studies for us, 2016, 19, and 22, has said has been the history of this district. Ups and downs of enrollment, and that the district needs to have enough facilities to be able to weather these ups and downs. And of course, her projections are, at this point, over the next 10 years, that we will surpass the peak enrollment, which was back in 2000, 2001. She is projecting that by 2030, 31, 32, there will be more than 2,421 students. 2,541 is her projection. So, and you know, at some point, I'm sure after that, there'll be another decrease. I mean, that's just where the SAD enrollment is. I think many school districts follow this. But we are, you know, I think I said it last week, we're unique in the sense that this SAD will be increasing over the next 10 years projected, during a time when the state of Maine's school enrollment will be dropping by over 7%. And that means that most school districts in Maine will be dropping for the next 10 years while we are adding. And that's the projection. So it doesn't necessarily follow the state enrollment on that, because this district has a lot of land for development and has been developing, and there's been other factors at play over the years. But that just kind of gives you an up and down of the history of the SAD enrollment for the last 55 years. Yep.
This is really helpful data points, but I think that this would be quite interesting to just drop into a graph to show the trend line, because it just by picturing this in my head, it's going like this, but it's not going like this where the trend line stays like this. The trend line is quite obviously, especially for the last 30 years, going like that.
Yep.
And
we will be putting this into, I actually have a partial graph for you, but we're going to do the full graph on this one, definitely.
And the other point that I think would be helpful just for people who don't have the history is understanding the number of buildings the district had previously when some of these numbers were higher, because that's been a big shift. And I think one of the themes that we've been talking about of why we need like a fourth building is related to our population size. And I keep meaning to do this, but dig a little into other school districts and the number of students and how many buildings they have supporting those districts, because it seems like we may be an outlier with only having 3 buildings to support the population that we have at this point.
Yeah, and some of, you know, obviously, as we know, our schools are really large compared to other Maine schools. In other states, they might be an average size, but having 800 students in a school, Falmouth definitely has a school that's larger than, you know, any of our buildings right now. But in Maine as a whole, most schools are around 200 students.
Especially
average.
at the younger levels,
Yes.
you tend to see smaller sizes, right? Okay.
Yep.
Is there a correlation like square foot per student? Because it's something where like the number of buildings, you know, that given the Falmouth has giant buildings, but so, or you could have a district that has community schools. There's like a bunch of little
Right.
schools, and so 7 buildings. So it doesn't necessarily tell you the full story, but if there's more like a square footage per student, I feel like that could be.
Yeah. Do you know, is there a rough estimate, or Tyler, you might know that, what is the recommended square footage per student in Maine for, you know, building a new building, for example?
Yeah, the Department of Education has 3 areas. So elementary is right around 140 to 145. I'm going to do this off of memory, so we'll check it when I get back to the office. But I think middle school is like 160, and it steps up to 180 for high school.
Yeah.
And then local programs kind of fluctuate that up and down depending on specialized programs and different needs.
It's a good question, though, to look at the square footage completely.
I think that's an excellent question, because that's really what drove our big numbers. We have this many kids, therefore we need this much space, and what can you build that space for? And it ends up being a very large number.
But to Mike's point, what it might show is even though we're not at the peak right now, the last time we were at that peak, we had a 4th building, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, and a 5th one too, but both were smaller buildings.
okay.
Yep.
And I believe we have the square footage of the 3 existing buildings, so if we,
Yep.
in our records, had the square footage of those other buildings, wouldn't be too hard to add that line item, and it might show that we're at or near a peak now, even before the roll-up and the ramp-up in students.
I like showing that square foot per student. Yep, that may be interesting to look at.
It wouldn't be too hard to do either.
I'm just going to skip ahead because the questions are really great, and I just want to show that there are, some of these need to be updated some more, and this is just a draft document. But you can see going back to 08, 09, when there were 2 studies that were done back in that time period from NESDEC and Policy 1, showing that the enrollment would be dropping. There was a sustainability task force that was put together in 08, 09. And that task force was charged with figuring out the long-term facilities for SAD 51. As a result of that task force, there were recommendations made to the board of directors at the time, and the board acted on those those 2 studies back in 08, 09, and subsequently closed the Drown Road School, which only had 1 grade level in it at the time. I believe it was 6th grade. So back in at the end of the 2009-10 school year, Drown Road closed. And then a few years later, the task force recommended to the board, and the board also acted on closing the North Yarmouth Memorial School, which had 2 grades at the time, which was 4th and 5th. And that building closed back in 2014, in June of 14. An addition was made to the Greeley Middle School, so that it would be Greeley Middle School 4-8 and not 6-8 at that time, because again, those 2 studies had shown declining enrollment, which you can see absolutely was occurring from 08, 09 all the way through 15-ish, and then it starts to plateau. And now the enrollment has generally been going up, and this is only going up until 2020 on this particular graph. Obviously, we know that the enrollment continues to increase and is projected to continue increasing for 10 years. So I think this kind of just shows the illustration. We need to obviously complete this and update this for this draft. But I think actually there's another one I wanted to
point out, while we're on the topic of the enrollment study, I've gotten comments that people are concerned that, the enrollment study is too much speculation. And I think I asked Jeff if there would be a way to highlight with a visual that if you take our graph that looks at MIW, you can take that same ramp and just move it over 4 years and step it up. And that's not speculation. That is kids that already exist in MIW, which will be going to GMS. Take GMS, move it over and up. That is high school. That it's not speculation. So I think it would be good to highlight that in some way, and maybe Rebecca does that. Maybe already has a graph or something, but
she's got some of those visuals we can probably just pull from her report.
Helping people understand that it's not all speculation.
Can I ask a question?
Please.
So one of the things that I heard, probably similar to you, Jason, is that, and people use this phrase several times, that they had been sold on the idea of a 1 campus plan, which I presume was, and from what I remember, when we were talking about closing the schools because of enrollment projections, that was a very positive way of thinking about it, that 1 campus, we'll have everybody on 1 campus. And so several people were saying, okay, now we're being asked to forego that, and we all know, why that is, but it was hard to say to people, okay, that was wrong, or things are different now. But I guess maybe kind of keep that lens in mind as we do these graphics, to maybe have some sort of like acknowledgement, like this was what we thought was going to happen, and this is why we went to 1 campus, but now things have changed. Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, that is something that I think has come up a lot. Why can't we still, there's a lot of nostalgia around now having a 1 campus. We've had it for 9 years. People like it, and the bottom line is we just don't have the land. That Falmouth, for example, has a lot of land that's owned by the town abutting the campus, and they have the opportunity to keep that model, but we do not have that same amount of land, obviously. be interesting to look at square footage per kid per land area, not just building area, but what does the land look like? And I think the other piece of this narrative is in between 2008 and 10, as we know, there was a major recession that was going on, and the recession impacted school districts that were close to Portland, bedroom communities, and we were certainly one of them. And there were a lot of staff layoffs that occurred. There was a financial a component that was occurring during that time with the recession and with the decreasing enrollment or beginning of that. There were also a lot of staff layoffs that occurred. I think one year it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 25 staff members in one school year. So there's a lot going on that convinced the board at that time that things were progressing, and then this task force that had recommended the decrease. And you can see that in 09, NESDEC, which was one of the two groups that did a study back in 09, they showed that by 2017-18, there would be 1,789 students in the district, which was a significant drop from 2009 when the study was done. Policy 1 was the other group, and in 2009 they predicted there would be 1,832 students by 2017-18. And you can see, and this is really 17-18 is the year right when the enrollment started to shift upward again. The actual enrollment in 17-18 was 2,043 students. So both of those studies were off by, close to 250 students or more than 200 students at that time. So already by 17-18, both of these studies were not accurate. And if you think about the recession and the severity of that recession, it was the most severe recession since the Great Depression. Obviously, things get impacted economically, but they rebounded, as we know. And as they rebounded, so did people moving to this district, building houses, development. Scott, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about the Drown Road School in North Yarmouth, just a little bit more information as to the status of those buildings at that time.
Sure. I'll take a look at the dates too again. There was on the Drown Road School, that was actually a nice opportunity that we entered into with the town of Cumberland. And that building was renovated by the town of Cumberland after they built their new town hall. And so they renovated that building, and then it became a school space, and we were able to lease it from the town. And then we entered into a lease purchase option, which allowed us to get state subsidy on the building. But that building was basically always intended to revert back to the town if we had no further use for it. So it wasn't as if it was an asset that we were going to be able to hold on to forever. And so the town of our whole process around that was to try and get as much state subsidy as we could to offset that lease purchase as a permanent space. But always knowing that the town of Cumberland would have that back if we no longer had that need for it due to our enrollment. So that went back to the town of Cumberland is because it was, for their project that they had, and then they had other projects going on in that area at the time. The building had its limitations. It had 6th grade in it, and then I believe it had 3rd grade in it, and it had many limitations. But it was definitely a big help for us, and it was better than having modular classrooms, et cetera. It was a nice space for us to have. The North Yarmouth Memorial School closure, and that building was closed after we did the Drown Road School. That was actually approved by the voters at referendum, so it wasn't, it was the voters that approved the closure of that building based on the information that we had. The North Yarmouth Memorial School, that building actually had, quite frankly, reached the end of its useful life. It was every system in the building, every mechanical, every heating, operating system, even right down to every mechanical system, unit ventilators, et cetera, were well beyond their useful life, and the building was failing. The other thing is the building structure itself. We were putting an incredible amount of money into it every summer to deal with mold abatement and other items because the building sat down on the site and all the water ran towards the building. So it was built I don't know if you've ever seen like a concrete slab and then you put a garage on top of a concrete slab. It was built similar to that, so the water was getting to the sills, and we're literally cutting sills and rebuilding it year after year after year. So the building needed an incredible amount of work. The value to doing that, to get in there and do some kind of a referendum, do some kind of a project at the time, was between $7 million, I think, to $12 million, depending on what we had done there. So there was a large amount of what I call the cost that was foregone by not renovating that building at the time because we had declining enrollment, and spending $2 million to do the middle school addition, which allowed us to basically do something that was more cost effective for the taxpayers of Cumberland and North Yarmouth, rather than renovating that facility at the time with what we knew of enrollments. The other thing is that site and the building, by state statute, had to be offered back to the town of North Yarmouth by state statute. So they were entitled to have the building if they wanted it. So, and they accepted the building. So again, that went back to the citizens of North Yarmouth.
And now, many years later, we can't have it back.
I don't know. I haven't asked.
I believe they've done something different with it.
So it's a very nice, what they built over there is nice. And I think the only thing that survived over there was the gym, was a gymnasium. And that, when we had the North Yarmouth Memorial School, that served as our cafeteria and our gym at the time. So, and that housed 4 or 5. And so that's what it was with the North Yarmouth building. So I think it's, good to know just what happened to that building and why at the time, why we were willing to forego that cost and do the addition on the campus.
Can I ask, Scott, I know it's it's past, it's gone, but there seems to be so much nostalgia about that school. Was it known well then that this building itself was really failing?
Yes.
I
we
mean, I know
had,
memory's faulty, but people aren't.
Yeah, we
not
had
remembering
engineering
that.
studies on it. That was part of what we talked to the community about. Both communities had the opportunity to vote on the closure of that building. And so it was put out with well information, and it was passed in both communities.
Okay.
So, and then the $2 million addition was passed on a district-wide basis. So,
Scott, can you just clarify what you said about the memorial school being given back to North Yarmouth by state statute?
yeah, state statute says that when you close a building, you have to offer it to the community in which it's located. And they have an opportunity to accept the building, so.
Because otherwise, so like if we closed it, we weren't able to retain that piece of land, even though it wasn't occupied.
If we had thought we would have had a future use for it, we might have retained it, and then, of course, we would have had to probably demolish what was there because we couldn't leave an unoccupied building for that amount of time, not knowing where it was at. And but no, it certainly could have had the opportunity to, if we thought we had had a future use for that, but it seemed to make more sense to not have to enter into those costs to demolish the building and maintain it and hold it for all those years. And it's become a nice asset for North Yarmouth. So.
And in hindsight, we know that holding on to it might have been a moot point anyway, because we got a hard no from the water district that they would not allow us to risk that aquifer by putting such a
And there were
school.
actually conversations then about what we would do, because we did talk about, tearing the building down and building new and what that might look like. And, it's always easy to look into the rearview mirror and say shoulda, coulda, woulda. But there were problems at that time that we had, and things are made with the best decisions you have, and looking at what you have. And back then, to renovate that building was a lot of money, and the best alternative was a $2 million project on the campus to house 4 and 5 because we had space, so it made sense at the time.
Also, the cost differential of demolition and remediation to then build new versus just purchasing land is probably not that significant.
Yeah. I would agree with you, Mike.
Yeah.
You want to keep going through this? Or?
Sure. So as we go through this, in the chronological order, just if you guys think of other things that we should include in here, again, I want this to be the template for our website where people can see the entire history and click on these things and find the supporting documentation and deeper supporting data. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, just part of this story is obviously the new housing starts, and this graph comes from Rebecca Wandell's, I think, 2022 report, new housing units. And you can see the history. This is obviously a very attractive bedroom community of Portland. Going back to 2004, you can see that permits have begun dropping, and then by the 2000, late 07, 08, 09, 10 recession years, obviously development dropped way off and then started to build back up as we climbed out of the recession, and really hit a peak around 2016, 15 to 17. And that really mirrors some of the enrollment. It's obviously not all of the story, it's part of the story. There's also Rebecca's, for those of you who have heard her speak to the board on this report, she's also made it very clear that turnover housing after the recession was very, very strong in this community. So people were selling their houses between 2012-ish through 2020, where they had held during the recession years. And then after the recession and the housing values went back up, they were selling, and there was enormous turnover housing during those years back in the last decade, the latter years of the last decade. So that kind of mirrors it, and then you put the development in the mix as well with new housing starts and things kind of, I don't think anybody predicted the recession, just like no one predicted COVID. And COVID definitely has something to do with Rebecca's studies, as we've talked about. She wasn't sure if COVID was going to damper the enrollment. It stabilized our enrollment. We didn't go down, and now we've increased again. It really didn't do a lot in terms of stopping the enrollment increase. So these are things we've talked about before, but this is in the document that Jason started and that we'll be contributing to over and over again. But 2015 is when we first, because of all these factors, started to exceed the building capacity at Mabel I. Wilson School. We started putting units when we tried our best, and we continued doing this even when we put units on the grounds to find space within the building, and continued doing that for about 3 years. But in the meantime, we were so out of space, we started adding units at the modular units at the Wilson School back in 16. We added 4 classrooms then, 2 units, each with 2 classrooms in it. We participated, by that point, the town of Cumberland asked if we would join them in an enrollment study, a joint enrollment study. They had certain interest on the town side, the municipal side, and we had certain interest on the other side. We jointly hired Planning Decisions, PDI, at that time, and this was the first of the 3 recent studies. And that was the first time that a study showed that the studies from 09 were not we were getting so out of space, we added an 8 classroom unit at the Wilson School as enrollment continued going up. And I'm sorry that this next one is out of sequence. 2019, Rebecca Wandell was hired. Again, she was from Planning Decisions. She came and did our follow-up report in 2019, confirming and actually showing an even bigger increase projected over the next decade than she had showed in 2016. Of course, that was before COVID. By 2021, we were adding modular units now at the middle school because the 4th and 5th grade was now, we're starting to catch up just the tail end of it. So we added 4 units, which was actually 7 classrooms, 2 units, 2 classrooms, 2 classrooms, 2 classrooms, and then a single unit.
Jeff, really quick, just 2021, if I remember correctly, we added those to help with spacing at the time.
We
so
did.
So that was the reason why we added them at the time, but
Good point.
we have absorbed that at this point. Is that correct?
But now we've absorbed it.
if not starting to overflow that now.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And it's important to point that out, though,
Yeah.
because people will ask about that for sure.
that's
'Cause
a good point,
I've
Mike.
also heard that, like, you added those because of COVID. Yes, we did. And now we're overflowing them.
Right.
That's right.
And,
good
and this
point.
may be on the following pages, Jeff, but we haven't seen them yet. But during this time, you're already having planning conversations about a new school or new school spaces.
Right.
Because I remember pre-COVID being discovering maybe this room for the first time and being part of a bunch of different breakout sessions and seeing presentations done around the school. I think at that point there was a design that was on campus.
Right.
So
get moved
that being part of what was going on during this time.
Right.
We have, well,
do have that,
in
but
one
it's-
draft, we have that blended in, so that'll be in the chronology for sure.
Right.
And
But I
then,
appreciate you pointing out that's, because that's really where it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A couple of notes on that. The building permits, I think it would be helpful to see maybe Cumberland versus North Yarmouth if we were gonna do a chart, the two different colors or something. In 2019, I think it was the GP COG study also, which supported and proved sort of the housing turnover was a big portion of that. And then I think it would be helpful each time here, as far as seeing the sort of money that we're spending on modulars, each time that we add that in, maybe see the operating costs and the capital costs that we spent on that each time we did this.
Mm-hmm.
And those are pretty big numbers, and over time, they add up to a lot.
Sure.
Yeah, those are good points.
Is it also worth to, because there's been 3 buildings that have been looked into in depth. One of them went to referendum, but 2 other got pretty close
Right.
to referendum. It might be worth sharing those. I don't know if we have those presents. You guys did great concepts for each of them.
If any of the presentations you'd like to see.
Yeah.
Well, we also have a whole list, and we have all these documents too, the whole list of properties that were looked at, and all of that as part of that initial piece of looking for land. I don't remember how many properties there were, but there was a lot,
A dozen or so.
half a dozen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that would be really good to add, especially if those were properties in Cumberland Center or near the school, because that seems to be a common recurring question. Why aren't you building near the school? So, but wherever they are, yeah.
One of them was on campus.
In addition to that, Leanne and I was at that same workshop. In fact, Tyler and I were talking about that, that was very much community input about what a new school should have. And the things that came out of it were definitely reflected in the design for Gray Road. Environmental efficiency and outdoor play space. I mean, it was just like the school was designed, and Tyler, you can speak to this, in part, at least, because of what the community who was at those workshops said they wanted out of a school. So I think anything we can link, to that. Now, granted, that was before COVID. Construction costs have gone up, but we were building the school that the community told us that they wanted. In that sense,
We didn't do a good job. When we pivoted away from the campus and went to 80 Great Road, all of that groundwork that had been laid with listening sessions and involving the community, all of that moved over to the 80 Gray Road site. But somehow we did a terrible job relaying that information, and they thought that we just didn't include anybody in the 80 Gray Road site. And all of that moved into it. So, good point, Kim.
Yeah, and I think part of the reason it may not have gone over is that the board approved or accepted, I guess would be the word, what Kim was talking about, the steering, and I'm actually literally working as we're doing this because this will become a draft document we want to keep adding to. And, the board accepted the steering committee's recommendation in November of 2019, which was just 4 months or 5 months before COVID hit, for a primary school to be located off campus. That was the recommendation, and the board at that time found that was the right recommendation. And then there was a period of time after COVID started where nobody was doing anything because everything was kind of shut down. So there was about a 6-month period of time when that did not take place. But, you know, showing the steps that happened after the board accepted the steering committee's recommendation for a primary school off campus, and then the two subsequent, or there's really three designs, obviously in North Yarmouth behind the community center. There was a second design that was on campus, and then the third design, which is the one that went to referendum. And we'll be putting all of that information in. Love to have, I know Tyler's probably got way more information than I do, but we can link in things from those designs and people can go and look at them. I've got a bunch of materials that we can link in as well. So if anyone wanted to look at those designs and see what was looked at back in those times, you can look at the sequence and kind of follow the story all the way through. And then in 2021, we were, again, we're now over 200 students more at the Wilson School, sustaining that enrollment growth. So in 2021, we end up adding one more section, 2 more rooms to the 8-room unit we had on the campus. And then we also added 2 more smaller units, 4 rooms back in 2021. At that time, Rebecca Wandell came back and did a third enrollment study in 2022, a year ago in March. She presented that to the board, showing that, again, increases in enrollment, they weren't as strong of the increases because of COVID, did do some dampering of the numbers, but it was still a very sharp increase over the next decade. Again, we'll be linking all of these in here. And I know we've talked about the cyclical turnover enrollment and et cetera, and I think that kind of brings us up to the chronology, but this is a working document. We'll be working on this document over the next month to get it finalized.
Jeff, one other thing that I recall that I don't know if it's on here, it was that there was at least one call from the district for potential properties
Right.
that didn't yield anything useful. Was there one round of that, or were there multiple rounds of that?
There was multiple rounds, but there was one formal one.
Okay.
And I think that was right, looking at Tyler.
September of 21.
21, thank you. Yes, that
So
was
right
definitely-
after the on-campus.
Yes.
Exactly.
Didn't work out.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, the on-campus presentation was in August of 21. We had gotten pretty much up to the point where I think it was the joint board meeting, getting ready to call the election, and then we kind of pivoted.
I just rewatched that.
I was going to ask,
Yeah,
so
that's a nice way of putting it. And we pivoted.
can we put a link to that joint board meeting?
I was just going to say links to
That-
meetings would be really helpful.
Because there was
Yeah.
sheer opposition from the
Yeah.
town council, Cumberland Town Council, and the North Yarmouth Select Board, and a lot of it was due to the Department of Transportation. And so I think it's important for the community to be able to see that.
I don't know that meeting, did you said you watched that
It
meeting?
was not, oh, you watched it?
Oh, I did.
Was that the August?
August. It was, I don't know if the decision was made during that meeting, but it started to bubble up during that conversation, questions about those.
Oh, that one
impacts.
was televised. That was at the community center.
That was at the
That
community
was
center, and
televised.
that was when
Yep.
I think North Yarmouth asked if another alternative site was presented, if the board would look at
Exactly,
Yep.
yes. Okay, that one was televised. We can link that one in.
But I think what may not have been part of that was then how the actual decision got made. Like, it wasn't
Right.
probably made during that session, but that's where some of those conversations really bubbled up.
And then we were also under an option agreement for property, obviously next to the campus, so we'll have that in there as well, and that was before this time.
But there's no recording of that meeting where the town of Cumberland said, based on the DOT recommendations, right? There's no recording of
There's
that
no
one?
recording.
Yeah.
No, that meeting was held at the town hall, and there
Right.
was no recording of that meeting.
Yeah.
That was a workshop. It was a public workshop, but it wasn't televised
Right.
or recorded.
And so was that after August 2021?
It's before,
No, that was before.
because then they had the August meeting, like,
It was before. What's interesting is that it didn't, I guess, really come across in that August meeting.
Right.
As strongly, maybe?
Right. Yeah, when I was looking and trying to link,
Yeah.
meetings for people, and there wasn't that one moment of like, this is no longer an option. Yeah.
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 Well, I
Just,
think we had heard concerns about some of the Department of Transportation requirements that were going to happen kind of you know, around this area, but I don't think the opposition was as clear as it was when we rolled out in August.
It was
That-
clear
that
at
was my
that meeting.
takeaway from
Yeah.
last
It was
week.
very clear.
Yeah.
It was crystal clear.
Yep.
We got the message.
So we've got the,
Yeah. Additionally, the North Yarmouth site, the first North Yarmouth site, is there a letter that exists from the water district?
There is.
there is.
We
Tyler
linked
has
to
that. He
too?
shared it
That to
recently.
it,
Yeah.
like that.
And it's a hard no. There is no ambiguity in
Oh,
that
that is-
It
letter.
was
Yeah.
very clear. Yeah,
But that gentleman is now gone, and there's someone else in that role
that's true.
at the water district.
Yeah. I mean,
Not to get in the weeds, but I'm just saying that decisions could change with that.
yeah.
Came from their board.
I have a hard time
Yeah.
believing that there's going to be less, or people are going to want to risk that aquifer. That's just water these days is pretty important, and I wouldn't expect that to change. And now we have the issue of it's owned by North Yarmouth, and there's a beautiful community center there. So.
And we don't have that problem at 80 Gray Road.
Yeah, unfortunately, fortunately, everything is compared to that now. It is the default location. If we find other properties, is it better than 80 Gray Road? Yep.
It's not.
Yep. Right. Okay, so I would say over the next many weeks, anybody, you all that think of things that should be in this document, let's point them out, and we can make this better and better. And as we move forward and eventually get to the point of a PR company or marketing company that might help us, this can be the basis for making a beautiful website around this.
I have 3 points that I just wrote down through the whole presentation. One is how we can emphasize that we are a 4-school district. I mean, that should be very clear.
That came from Rebecca a couple times, didn't it?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it
she's
just
made it
feels like
clear.
it got kind of lost in the translation with this last referendum. For some reason, it just didn't seem like it was like a header that, regardless of where it is, that's the first and foremost.
That's like a huge point she's made, she's driven, is that we are just a facility short for the long-term enrollment.
And the other is when we did have high enrollments, and this was brought up, and I forget by who, we had 4 or 5 buildings more than what we had 2 more buildings or 1 more building than we currently have.
With 3 grades.
With 3
total.
grades
Yep.
total. And the other one, I just like to put things into bucket. The Greeley campus is too small. We would take up a lot of green space if we were to build on this campus.
Yep.
Those
Which
are,
we already don't have.
right. So I'm just saying, for me, those are like 3 big, no matter what the timeline is and when what close, those are big buckets.
I agree. It can't be emphasized enough how much, if you look at Google Earth and look at our campus, there is not much that we aren't using. And so anything we add, you're taking away from something else. We've already lost, well, I guess at the end of next summer, we're going to have lost both of our baseball fields. And so to your point, Vanessa, I think that anything we do would just be postponing that we need a 4th building, period. And our campus can't support that sort of square footage, really.
And the other is, and I don't know the facts behind this or not, is Cumberland, do we give out unlimited building permits at this point for new schools? Whereas I know Falmouth and Yarmouth does have a restriction on that at this point, and possibly other areas to keep more green space. And I think we do not have that in North Yarmouth or Cumberland at this point. So developers are really, I'm not 100% sure on what their planning board is permitting,
Yep.
but it kind of feels like their building have slowed down, whereas we're allowing a lot of building permit, but I don't know.
Who's we? What do you mean? So,
North Yarmouth and Cumberland, I don't know how many permits are given out, but
Yeah.
it just seems like
So, I'm stepping out of my lane here a little bit, but I know North Yarmouth, has capped it
Yeah.
actively. There are state limits as far as what you can do. You can only cap it at 105% of the last 10-year average, so there are limits as to how much you can truly squelch growth. Cumberland, on the other side, you know, this conversation has been had many times in the last few years, and they do have a building permit cap, but they've never come close to it. And they've never, the conversation hasn't really gone very
Lower.
far about actually bringing that cap down. There's, yeah.
Okay.
Different conversation.
And I also know other areas have also capped, teachers who work in the district cannot have their kids go to that district, and we have not yet. I believe Yarmouth put that in still 3 years ago. And I think Falmouth is also heading down that. Now, this isn't factual, but this is just teachers that I know of that have been saying that that's,
What's our net in and out total, Jeff?
it's not a lot,
Yeah, it's
but
not much. I mean, and Rebecca did study that. She actually looked, she has different models in the report where she studied the ins and outs of superintendent agreements, transfers in and out. And it doesn't have a huge impact. It has a small impact.
yeah, those other areas might have had a bigger impact, but, and
Yeah.
I think it's a bonus that if a teacher wants to work here, their child can come here.
Right.
But if we're really strict on enrollment or tight on enrollment,
Yeah, we don't have a hard and fast rule for
Right.
it. We try to accommodate staff if
Yeah.
they ask, but I have to say in the last 5 years, I've been saying no a lot because we just don't have enough space.
Yeah.
Saying no more than I'm saying yes.
yes, yeah.
I think that one point about campus too small, I really would like to see that explained explicitly there, that, you know, the state requires a certain size footprint for any new elementary school. And because what I'm hearing is, oh, it's a big, beautiful campus. You've got this road that goes through it. You've got all these fields because, you know, yes, we lost a baseball field, but, well, we still have one. So I don't think, and we have access to Twin Brooks and those fields, so people have said, like, well, just do all your outdoor stuff there. So I think we really need to be specific why that is being stated. It's too small. What do we mean? And I don't know, maybe
not
maybe
this-
the voters really do want a urban type of campus where there's building, sidewalk, building. I mean, maybe that's what they want. Maybe that's where we're going. Maybe we're not a bedroom community anymore. We become something else. But I think people need to see what we're trying to preserve and what we need if we build here.
I think there's also a state standard around the size of the property for a certain size building.
There's guidelines.
I
It's
think
not
there's
hard and
guidelines
fast.
around that, but and I think when we were looking at 80 Gray Road, it met that standard. So I think that there's a certain number of acres
So let's
based on the
put
number
that
of
in and
students,
make
we
that
can
very
look at that.
clear.
Sure.
Yeah.
And that any, I mean, permanent building would trigger those DOT
Right.
changes
Right.
Yes.
also.
Specify all of that. Put it down so they can see it.
So the one other thing we haven't really touched on yet that I know has been talked about previously is just grade configuration. So if we can work that in to why the recommendation is for the other building to be of the lower grades versus it becoming a community elementary school.
I think we had a
Great
curriculum
points.
study done, and the teachers had input with that grade
It
configuration.
was a
and
steering committee
there
recommendation.
was,
And
okay.
we'll link that in, and we've got the whole report. It's like a 25-page report that the steering committee did. I've got all this stuff. I'm
And,
gonna just link it in.
Perfect.
And I
But yes, we have that report, that recommendation, and it included all of the reasons why.
And one of them, I believe, that is how the state has the grade configurations.
For curriculum.
For
Yeah,
curriculum.
for curriculum.
It's
It
how
kind of
it's set
fit
up.
into the curricular. I mean, it's not, we don't have to do it, but
We don't have to, but
there were a lot of other reasons, like
Yeah.
keep our schools smaller, having young children have more land to access. There's a whole bunch of reasons the committee felt very strongly when they made the recommendation. So that's a good point. We'll make sure we link that report in here
Great, thank you.
as well.
That discussion came up in the early days of 80 Gray Road as well, when we were talking about how to break up the grades. And then we had the conversation again about neighborhood schools and whether like K through 5, all North Yarmouth kids go to North Yarmouth and Cumberland here. It's not as easy as we'd think, because Cumberland essentially is twice the size of North Yarmouth, which compounds the issue. Like by just putting North Yarmouth kids there, it doesn't help the issue as much as you'd hope. And then there was great concern about splitting up the towns and how people would take that.
Perceive that.
So that I'm willing to have that conversation again. I don't think it's a bad conversation to have, but I think that would be one that would bring up a lot of strong feelings, and I wouldn't want to go down that road unless there was very broad support for it from all
Have all your
community members.
peers together all the way through,
Yeah.
as opposed to separating them out.
It does make the school, the grades much smaller, which would be a bonus, sort of smaller feel, but that would be a big pivot.
And we were also, I think another standing point was keeping 4 or 5 together.
Yes.
Yep.
That those teachers have worked so long together.
Yeah.
But
And it just, also it's a grade level, it just lends itself
Yeah.
together.
Susie felt very strongly, and I remember that keeping 4 or 5 together. Yeah.
So, one question I have, I didn't talk to nearly as many people as Kim, but the few people
Nobody has.
the few people I did talk to had the same question, which is, have we looked for 5 to 7 flat acres along Greeley Road or Tuttle Road or along Middle Road, that where we would save money on the infrastructure costs as opposed to going out to the woods. So I don't know if we have an easily summarized kind of RFP for what we would be looking for, but we might want to considering that there's no cost to it, just engaging a broker if the school has one, and just being on the lookout now, so that 3 months from now, or whenever the relevant date, if people say, well, have you been looking for something that's along Greeley or Tuttle Road or Middle Road, we can actually answer that question.
We're going to talk about that a little bit later. I think the actual number, if we were going to do something similar to what we did in at 80 Gray Road, we're more like 15 to 20 acres, aren't we?
Yeah, that 5 acre number is another piece that we're going to add to this FAQ, because the actual development area that we utilize on Gray Road is closer to 17 to 20 acres when you count the access road. So I think that's something that we need to better convey to the community.
So later in the conversation, we're going to talk about the when and the where and the costs of pivoting from 80 Gray Road. So,
Can you explain that in more detail? I know there's been a lot of talk about how we were looking to buy 70 acres, but only using 5 or something. I'm sure I'm getting the numbers wrong a little bit here, but so other than the access road, I assume in part we needed it to be a certain length because of just the configuration of the lot. But
Yeah, absolutely. So,
yeah.
And this will vary depending on the amount of utilities that are on site, but the things to keep in mind is that we were looking at about a 70 to 80,000 square foot footprint just of the building proper, which is almost 2 acres in itself. So by the time that you draw the line around playgrounds and the space between wings, we were somewhere between 3 and 4 acres just for the building with nothing else. Some of the things that we were also utilizing space for over there obviously is parking, utility access over to a septic leach field, and then making sure that we had left enough space for a future ball field on that campus. That was something that we had heard kind of repeatedly at all our public forums and meetings. So when we got done with all of that, we were somewhere in the 14 or 15 acres utilized on that campus, and some of that's based on geography and the topography of the site. We used another couple acres just getting into the site, again based on the orientation and the shape of the site. That was what was required.
That's great.
And
And
also
you
the-
probably need some buffer zone,
Absolutely.
from
And
other
then, you know,
properties, too.
a lot of the things that we heard at some of the public forums that we had discussed earlier tonight is just that connectivity to nature and utilizing outdoor play and learning spaces for a broader context. So it's really a lot of those things tied into the educational adequacy and some of the excitement, I think, about that site.
It was also the cost of that property versus, I mean, when you look at getting 70-something acres versus, 15 acres somewhere, 20 acres for, $1.2 million after you take out the individual's gift to the district of a portion of that. That was a pretty good encouraging factor as well.
And our 2 acres on the previous attempt on campus was, what,
The same.
1.4 million, I think?
1.4 million.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think we've heard that a lot, that we're buying 76 acres but only using a tiny bit. Well, I think we're using, 17, maybe more. And
But
I
the
think
correlation between,
what's that?
the correlation between the cost.
Yeah, so the
Yeah.
important part is that even if we didn't use that other 50, one, it wasn't offered to us as just buying the 20, but
That's right.
even if we took that other, say, 56 acres away, I don't believe the cost or the appraised value of that land would have changed much at all, because the what was not being used was the hill. It was forested, not great for development, and the wetlands beyond and south of the school, which we wouldn't use. But both of those things, I think, are quite nice for a school setting. As far as, I've also heard concerns about the operating costs of that extra land, and I don't think that would be much at all. I mean, literally, we would leave it as forest, the occasional dead tree to deal with, and we have already been approached by various conservation trusts that would love to partner with us and make some trails and maintain portions of that. So I just don't believe it would be an operating burden. And as far as market value and our price, I don't believe it would change much at all if we didn't use that other 56 acres, or if we didn't take that other 56 acres. And being able to control it and own it to sort of protect our own privacy, if you will. I think that has value. So I was going to mention all that later, but so as far as timeline, getting us to the referendum, had a lot of good ideas here. I mean, I think we can just keep building on this document and finding the supporting data, and this is what a PR company will help us build out and make available to everybody going forward. Moving on in the agenda, so this brings us to the referendum, which did not pass. Don't want to spend a ton of time on this, but I think that it is important to go through, and I'm trying to find the right piece of paper here. Okay. Here it is. All right. So, reasons why the referendum failed. So, we don't have to answer every last one of these. I'll go through the ones that I've heard, and I think it's important. First on the list, what I've heard, having in-depth conversations with many people, is it was a good project that landed at a hard time, landed at a bad time. So it wasn't a perfect project. It was a good project. But what I've heard over and over is the fiscal atmosphere that has happened in our country in the last year or two with inflation has made it hard for people to invest. And I think it's important to sort of acknowledge that as we talk through all the other things that we could have done better, that really undermines all of it when people aren't feeling financially comfortable and willing to invest in a project of this size. So what's going to make that better? And my concern is the only thing that can probably make that better is a little bit of time. So going back out to referendum, I personally have concerns about going back out too quick. And if that atmosphere hasn't changed, will the vote change? We can talk about that.
Just on that, Jason.
Go ahead.
You know, when you look at the economic outlook, and these things are very hard to predict, but you know, just if you just looked at like kind of consensus economist expectations, they seem to assume a decelerating economy throughout the year and possibly persisting into and throughout 2024. So, question is, if we're waiting for that perfect time, you know, how long do we end up having to wait?
And that's why I think we just have to circle back that we're a 4-school district. We need another school, a bunch of portables on the campus. I know it's going to hurt. I know it's never going to be a perfect time in the economy to build the school. One thing we do know, the further you push it off, the higher the cost is going to be.
For sure.
Just with inflation alone. So,
And the amount of sunk cost.
Sunk costs.
Going into modular cost and
Into the
site
modular.
work and
So I
everything else.
know, whenever we decide as a group to go to referendum, I think basing it on the economics of it is,
It's not so much the economics in my mind, it's the confidence of people.
I don't think, I mean,
I think people were more confident a year or two ago. I think
and it's, we're
inflation.
not heading in a boom right
Right.
now, so
Yeah.
we just have to build the confidence that we can't put any more portables on the campus. We walked through the school. I was in a classroom with no windows where a teacher teaches less than half the size, a quarter of this room, little kids. That's unacceptable for our school district. I find it unacceptable, and I know it's gonna hurt, and Scott had a great plan, but I just think we have to try our best for the impact of passing the school as less as possible.
Related to that, Scott, using the capital reserve to create the stepped impact, that was going to prevent tax increases for 5 years?
Yeah, what it was is we were using our undesignated fund balance to offset the increases to help offset a portion of the increases to our budget over that time frame till we got out to about 2030, 31, where debt service really, kind of dropped off a little bit. With having to now invest in, transfer money from that to our capital reserve in order to take care of site work and modulars, the $5 million that we had set aside purposely over a period of time to soften that debt impact, that will now not be available to us because we won't have that opportunity to do that now.
The full 5 million at this point?
Over the period of the next several years, we will utilize those funds between what we're doing this summer, then what we're doing the following summer. And then over the 5-year period that we have, you're right at that number. So yeah, we literally lose the opportunity to have that to offset that debt. Based on what our current space needs are and what we need to do for modulars, site work, all of that, so.
And that's also why, in the finance committee, we looked at a 1-year and a 2-year plan for the portables. So we decided to take the greatest location, Maple I. Wilson, create that as the first step one. If potentially we could get a referendum going, move that forward for Greeley Middle School.
Yeah, so the answer, Mike, is yes, we lose that opportunity.
Thanks.
Jason, as far as bad timing, did you also list the how spooked Cumberland residents were about the reassessment?
Yeah, I think that had more to play into it than the economy.
People wanted to know exactly
Exactly.
how much their taxes were going to increase. I wanted to know exactly how much my taxes were going to increase. And so it was so hard to remind people that the assessment, what an assessment really does, that just because the value of your home is going up, that doesn't mean you're going to owe more money. yeah, so I don't know how that can factor into our future timeline, because I don't know when that will be completed, but I
I
feel
heard
like that
that a
should
lot.
be included in our list of things.
Yeah, it's another thing that added to the uncertainty, for sure.
Evaluation.
Yeah,
Four
when
other
is- do we
public
know?
projects in the area failed as well, which was unprecedented. To be clear, Vanessa, I want to go back to referendum as quickly as we are sure that we are conveying a good project and that it'll get broad support. But part of that is the marketing and communication phase of it, which my belief in hindsight needs to be like a minimum of 6 to 9 months. So,
Oh, I don't have that target date of thinking tomorrow, next, you know.
yeah, yeah,
But just knowing that we are moving this ball forward, we are going to referendum in the
yep,
next
agreed.
6 to 9 months, and that's where we're moving.
Well, and even doing that, by the time you get everything ready and you move into construction and so forth, you know, we're out that almost
Yeah.
5-year period, right? I mean, to where you would open a school, so.
I think half our kids on this board will
Yeah.
not even be, it won't be in the position.
Even if you went out to referendum that quickly.
They will
So-
be
Yep.
going to the school, and we will
Stop
be the ones,
reminding us.
and we'll be the ones saying, we don't want our taxes to go up, because we don't want to move out of the district. So I have to say that that's,
I will not say that.
I
Have my
know.
word.
I know.
So other things that I heard anyway, just a general distrust of institutions or whatever, and I think COVID did not help with that, with schools in the past year. Doesn't matter what side you come down on, it's been a hard year for that part of it. And so how can we improve that? You know, we can talk through that, but I think it's communication, repetition, and consistency, really, just doing these things better over time and gain that trust back. Total price tag, this may be the hardest one to overcome as far as improving that. That's to be determined. Creativity, this will be a hard one to overcome because I think it goes back to how many kids, how much square footage, cost per square foot.
That's another one. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to interrupt you again. When I would look through the main standards, there were a lot of places where where the plan went above, to exceed the standard, which, in my opinion, you build a school, you build it right, and you're
once, yeah.
thinking, you know, you're forward thinking about, especially environmental efficiency, energy efficiency. But we did exceed the state standards in our plan. Now, that was probably based in part on what the community said they wanted, but then it kind of all of a sudden became, you know, we're building this gold standard school. We're trying to be a leader among other schools in Maine, all the things that have a lot of value but weren't universally accepted as valuable. So I don't know, like when you said the price tag, I don't know if that's worth revisiting or not.
I know we kept on getting asked at the time, we don't want to have to build again in 3 years. So I think that we charged Tyler to make sure that when we build this school, we're not going to be asking in 3 years to build a bigger school. So that's
Exactly.
why you'll see, even if we put these studies out, that whatever school that we're building is going to be bigger than state standards, so we don't have that
Well, I meant more
problem
in terms of
3.
like energy efficiency and
Oh,
things like that.
piece of
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
I just think the square footage, if you do that, it's going to be higher.
Oh,
and
absolutely,
it's going to
yeah.
be because we were trying to have the voters know that we're not going to ask again in 3 years for a
Yeah.
bigger school.
It's also, you know, and this comes up a lot of times, and Tyler, I know where you're gonna head with this, the minimum standard of state standards under, you know, what would be state subsidized is what you're really talking about in those minimum standards, okay? So in many communities, build larger classes than the square footage or the minimum because those minimums don't meet what a education today requires. So I don't know if you wanna add to that.
Yeah, and I would say that document that you're looking at, if it's the same one that we utilize, is very clear on what, you know, what a classroom is, what the different programs are. But typically when we're going through a negotiation with the state, we're taking a look at some of the secondary programs and specialized programs that each individual district has. And a lot of times the state will fund those after justification. So, you know, that's kind of like the baseline. this is what we do at the minimum, and then we make a lot of, we have a lot of discussions around special education, small group instruction spaces, a lot of these other things that are unique to individual districts. So that's I think what's driving some of the differentiation between just the strict list on the state side and what's proposed in here. And then to some of the other points, there is a lot of flexibility built into this plan with small group instruction space that can be a future classroom with an operable partition. So, some of these strategies in here to eliminate the need to go out in the short term for, another building project for short-term population challenges.
You mean another modular on
Exactly.
that
Yeah.
side? Yeah.
Eek.
So yeah, I don't know how we can communicate that better. Just to let people know that this is not the Taj Mahal, as several people asked.
It's a great point, Kim, and I think what Vanessa was saying about square footage, about making sure we don't have to go back and add to it, the same can be said for energy usage and the operations of the building. So it's something where if you build a building, but then 3 years later you're like, oh, we should put heat pumps in this thing. That's dumb. When we can actually do that at the start as part of the initial construction cost, I think it's important to make sure make that point as well.
Well, I think one thing that comes back is that there are also members of the community who will then compare the building that we built for Curley Center for the Arts and the quality of that space. And I think then that somehow gets conflated with what a primary school building is going to be. And at the same time, also community members aren't able to see how much that space is being used throughout the school day by so many different departments, let alone, any sort of performances and presentations and things like that. So I think that that's just a misconception that doesn't help us.
So extra land not needed. We talked about that a little bit. We certainly can explain that better. Building too fancy is what
Sorry, I didn't mean to
Kim
get ahead of you
just
there.
brought up. And I would say that, from all the discussions that I was part of in 80 Gray Road, we did overbuild as far as space a little bit, like we just talked about, extra space, flex space, spaces that can become classrooms when we grow. We heard over and over, don't build it too small, build it right the first time once. But other than that, general discussions were focused on sort of best value. But I think if we go back and look at this again, we can probably do some more things. Like I heard, the blue stone on the library. People thought that was too fancy. So, right or wrong, that's a perception. So, and stone benches was another one that I heard. The benches were too
Granite
expensive.
amphitheater.
So,
You know-
there's just these things that, the cost might be the same, but we got to present it better and just a good focus on value, not the gold standard, really.
What I'd like to see that we do as a board is to put a survey out to the community and gather that data, because what I hear and what you hear and what Mike hears and what Tyler hears, it's completely different. Kim heard a lot, so I feel like she has a good gauge, but it's speculative and it's hearsay, and I think we aren't going to do anybody any justice in ourselves of spinning our wheels to guess from different perspectives without putting out that survey. My concern about putting out a survey is the technology aspect of it to those community members who probably didn't vote for it or didn't have access to it because they are concerned about their taxes increasing and staying in their homes. So I know, I always forget the woman's name. She heads up at the Cumberland Town Hall to reach those community members, and maybe that would be a paper survey to them. And I know she'd be happy to drive around and do that. So I think that would be my recommendation, best approach to move forward.
And getting the data on why people voted no, basically.
Yeah,
right?
like
The-
all
the
these questions
true-
that we have, like,
Yep.
why did you, I mean, there's 800 people that voted no, or 827, and why did you? And that would be the first question, did you vote no or yes?
Well, that's the spread. That's not the total number.
I know, we only have to convert 800 people. But if,
I'm not aiming for 51%. It'd be great to.
I know, but if we could gather all that, like, put all the yeses in one bucket and be like, okay, we don't need, maybe we look at that secondary, but all those no's, why?
Yep.
Survey's a great idea. I
Because
fully
I-
support. Yeah, and I support getting it out through all methods, not just email, but we should consider a mailing to both
I'm
towns.
almost thinking of mailing.
Yeah. Not like just like a postcard that says, go to this thing, and if you need a paper, go to town hall or wherever to get and fill it out. I think it's a great idea.
Or we'll have one mailed to you.
Sure.
Well, and I know that this is something that we have talked about previously about doing a survey, and here we are, it's February, and the referendum was in November. I would hope that we can do something quickly so that we can have this information to do the best planning that we can.
Well, and also I've heard, again, hearsay.
I trust everyone what everybody heard. That's not what I'm
but
saying.
No, but just even the people who voted yes last time, I think if we don't do this well, then they may not
Right.
remain a
Yep.
yes vote. So I just think it's
Or something in their lives have changed. And
Right.
We're not.
And I would like to believe that, we can take in that feedback and be responsive to the community concerns, but there are certain things we haven't been able to change that we would like more available land, so we have choices. I mean, people want choices, and I feel like that's where a lot of the questions came up. They didn't understand how we got to this being the only choice for their communities. So if we can use that to help with that conversation, I think it'd be really helpful.
So, I'm on board with the survey. At the very least, I think it would be a gesture of goodwill to let people know that we're listening to them. I do have concerns about the logistics of sending out surveys and then getting paper surveys back and processing all of that. I feel like it could be pretty expensive to do, and then also a bit of a mess on the back end. I think one thing, if we're willing to wait a little bit, is to actually just set up a couple of tables at the polls this spring, and just give people, our voters, surveys that they can fill out right there. Or we could even use tablets and have them put stuff in, and it'll automatically tabulate the results. If we're willing to wait that long. And then we could also just fill in the gaps with people who don't vote. But is that too late for us? I mean, we're not going to get, well, we haven't decided this, but if we don't put it on the ballot for this spring, like a new referendum, then what's the rush?
Would that take November off the table, doing a survey in June?
I think we need to do a survey like yesterday.
Because
And
I hear you. I think
Yeah.
a survey in June, a referendum in June, is off the table logistically. But it's certainly not logistically in November. But if we do a survey in June to be able to truly be representative of what we hear back, I think it'd be hard to then go back out. That seems tight, but I hear what you're saying. It makes a ton of sense. That's like a perfect time to do it. I don't know. Is there a way we can replicate that? Could we go to aging in place meetings?
Right.
Go to, I don't know, where do people go in the middle of the winter? It's in the library and yeah. I don't know.
Because if the expectation is that we're doing a survey in June to gather feedback that would influence however we put this back out, November is off the table, right?
We're going to talk about that in a little bit. Yeah. Yep.
Mike, to answer your question, I think it really depends
inhaled my DNA
on
of
what we
COVID.
get back. Like, if we hear that, like, 80 Gray Road, everybody hates it, like, just hypothetically, then we have to go back to the drawing board. But if there are certain things, like, on the margins that we could fix, we probably could get it out in November again.
I think maybe it would also just depend on all of the additional work that we're doing, perhaps like preparing for a possible November referendum regardless. So we still have that, and we're not playing catch up like once we would have the results. But I do think that there's like a lot of different factors. Yeah, I don't know, just a thought.
That's an interesting way to think about it too, whereas the survey is not the starting point. The survey is a midpoint almost, where we're doing a lot of work in thinking potentially towards a November referendum, and then we get things ready and then have more information to present, take a survey in June. We see what comes back. It's like, you're pretty close, fix a few things, and then potentially do that, or you're way off base. And then we go, okay, we need to take a little more time.
And maybe even, you know, with some of this work that we're doing now, like in terms of like having an updated, more robust website, that may also encourage people to participate in the survey because they have other information. I mean, I don't know, maybe not, just thinking out loud.
Do we want a sampling, or do we want as many voters as possible for a survey?
That's the trouble with the survey is, did you get a small group or did you get a accurate cross-section? Yeah.
Is there a PhD in the house who can help answer that?
Well, it's
Dr.
like,
Tom?
even if you read like the political polls, you have like everyone, and you've got likely voters. And I mean, if we sit there at the polls, we've got actual voters. And it's going to depend on who would show up for a particular reason. I mean, there are differences in June ballots versus November ballots that we want to take into account. I mean, I wonder too, like, even if we like rush this out, like we need to get a survey out yesterday, realistically, when is it going to get out? We need to design it. We need to get addresses from everybody. There's time in sending it out, and then it's sitting on their kitchen table for who knows how long, and then they actually mail it back.
How do we handle absentee ballots? And because not a lot of people are going to the polls.
That's a great question.
So
Yeah.
we're back
So
at.
do we definitely not want to do like a Survey Monkey?
That's what I was thinking, a simple Survey Monkey with 10 top questions and,
Yeah, or both, to Mike's point.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, we can get that
Can
out.
advertise
We've got
that
everyone's
everywhere.
email address.
yeah,
presumably.
Survey Monkey.
And I think to Mike's point, we could leverage the agent in place liaisons and say, can you help us get this out to our voters who aren't comfortable with technology? We really want to make sure we hear from them. You know, we can go with our computer to the meeting, whatever. But yeah, I think an electronic survey is going to be much more efficient than paper. And Tom, the other thing I'm thinking of is if this budget becomes contentious, and then that's the June ballot. I don't know if that would affect a polling table or not.
Maybe I'm in denial, but
I have faith in our finance chair.
I think the way that we've been trying to get, I actually think a lot more people are aware of this project and some of the details now than they were in the fall.
Yes.
And I think there's just more engagement and awareness about the project since it failed in November, that people are actually asking, you know, make sure it's in the crier, make sure it's in the North Yarmouth Town Notes, which we have been trying to do, and we did put out that we have a school building project page that's been updated, and we'll continue updating that page. So it might be, I do think that we probably would get a good return on an electronic survey if we were to put it out in all the places that we've been putting things out. I think we'd probably get a good return.
I think timing and thinking about what we're trying to get back for information, the timing on whether we put out an RFP to see if there's other space available, I think that could be really important to have out first, just to know if we really have other choices or options. Like, are we trying to convince people that this is the choice and we just need to figure out how we're gonna get everyone to understand what the options are, which have been limited? Or is there truly another option?
I don't think that'd be part of the survey.
I'm just thinking of timing of what we put, the types of questions we
Right.
put it on the survey, and what choice we do have.
Well, it would certainly be,
Would you like
And
to
then-
see on another property? And if-
well,
if
there'd
it
be
comes
some.
back no,
I mean, we've already paid.
or yes.
So we've already paid our architect to come to basically a concept design. So that cost would be something that we would save moving back over to the 80 Gray Road site versus having to enter into another agreement to come up with another concept design on another site. So that's a cost that we would have to additionally incurred, which, no offense, Tyler, but architects don't come cheap.
Getting pretty
So-
good at this, though.
Copy and paste.
What we're talking about now is sort of hinted at weighing the time and the cost of the various parts of the new process. So every time that we go back and we open something up wide open, you are adding financial cost and, maybe worse, significant time cost. Let me just get through my list here real quick of the reasons why it failed. People wanted one campus, and then people didn't feel involved. So we've already talked about some of those. So I think we could flesh out this list a little bit more. Moving on in the agenda, we're getting into the nitty-gritty here. So the pressing questions not to be answered tonight, but the things that we will have to answer very, very soon is the when and the where. So some of the things we've been talking about most recently here, both of these things affect each other. So right now we're looking at roughly a 5-year minimum time frame for opening. What we need to discuss is when to go back to referendum. The things that affect that. So one thing to keep in mind is the marketing phase of this. How long should that be? In my opinion, it needs to be 6 to 9 months minimum and done well. And then you need to talk about June versus November versus a special election. So in my opinion, part of the challenge of the failure in November is that nobody pays attention in the summer. Everybody's enjoying Maine summer, and then you come back and we had about 2 months to try to get all the information out. It was way too short. I personally think a June referendum is a better referendum because our marketing phase will overlap with the school year, and every single school event can be an opportunity for information to be out there. Yes, the budget lands in June, but also what lands in November is presidential election. So good, bad, or otherwise, if there's contention around that, contention is, well, people aren't happy. So that may affect the vote of the school. It would be nice for people to be able to look at the school vote as just a school vote, not be rolled up into these other things. A special election we can also do for a certain amount of money, somewhere in the $10,000 to $30,000 range, and that could be done.
Yep. Jason, with that in mind, can we just put on the table the costs of a referendum? Like both financial and also like if we put it out in June and it what was voted down again, like what would that cost be?
So there's significant costs in lots of different ways. One, paying Oak Point to go through another round of this, and then cost to the community. Like, it's stressful to go through this process. We lose more time again. And potentially lost confidence in the district. All of these things matter.
Are you asking if we just went back out this June, or are you talking about?
Are you talking about this June?
I'm not. I'm personally, if I were to choose, I would aim for June of '24. I believe it is a reasonable time frame that we can do well.
Yeah, I just want us to be aware of the costs, financial and otherwise, of
Yeah.
us just deciding, let's go to a referendum or a special election, whatever it might be.
Okay.
Can I ask another cost question, this time of Tyler Barter? Do construction costs ever go down year over year?
Occasionally. So, I mean, some of the things that you referenced tonight with your enrollment, the last time that we saw any significant decrease in construction costs was 2007, 8, and 9. And the reason that we got great deals on schools, the state was paying for them, it was still kind of going through it. It's really tough to count on something like that on a locally funded project. So we did see some savings there. They rebounded rapidly and have just kind of continued to go. We are seeing somewhat encouraging news on inflation, at least on the construction side, starting to stabilize. It doesn't look like it's going to go down in the next 2 to 3 years. We're still seeing strong starts on housing, things that even if the commercial side starts to slow down, we're seeing, some pretty big things on the horizon in this area on the housing side, which is going to gobble up a lot of resources. So, we're hoping that we start to see stabilization in our inflation rates, start to get back to that 3, 4, 5% instead of 9, 10, 11 that we've been seeing over the last 2 years.
Awesome. Thank you.
So I have a question about the special election. You said it costs.
We have to foot the bill, yep.
In the vein of it's expedient to get this done as soon as we can, but done successfully to get something to relieve these kids, these teachers. Why wouldn't we consider, cost, I got that. But a special election could be done whenever.
Mm-hmm. The only other downside really is potentially low turnout, which
However,
could go either way.
However, that could play favorably. The people that are passionate about it, it could be either way, but still, they won't be distracted by anything else.
That's right. It is a vote on just the school.
Yep.
No, it's an option.
Jason,
sure.
did you say it was 10 to 30 for a special?
The number I had in my mind when I talked to Bill Shane once upon a time, he threw out was 20 grand. That was just the Cumberland piece of it.
Yeah,
Scott, what do you know?
We've always shared the cost of the election with the town, so I'd have to go back and take a look at that and see. But they've always given us a deal on the elections when we run with concurrent with them because of the the savings between the two. So.
The opportunity costs of
Yeah.
delaying it further could be more expensive.
Yeah.
And I think especially as we think about school year openings and the timing related to when you would need a decision made to ensure that there's a school to be opened at the beginning of a school year, I like to be reminded of what some of those dates are, so we can make sure that information is used as part of our decision-making process.
Sure. So, the quick back of the napkin piece, it takes about 10 to 12 months to get through the design and permitting process on a project of this size. One of the biggest challenges permitting wise is going to be DEP, regardless of where this is going to be. They could be 4 to 6 months in their statutory permit review time, and a lot of times they tell you we're gonna end up needing it just because of what's in the pipeline. From that point, it takes say 2 months to go through a bidding process, and after that, probably about a month to get through the approval process. So, successful bid comes before the school board, goes to the lawyers for contract review, takes about a month. From that point, we would be anywhere from 24 to 26 months of construction, and you want to try to land that so that your construction is wrapping up in June and July, moving furniture in July and August, and then there's always that mad dash of getting staff in to get their room set up, and it's one of those challenges. So you really don't want to try to make up any time during that construction. It never really works out well. The other piece to that is you can attempt a mid-year turnover. Also never goes well.
No.
So, it's not something that we recommend. Districts have done it, but it puts a tremendous amount of strain on staff and leadership, and it's a challenge. So you really want to end your 24 months construction in July.
So another thing that we don't have to answer tonight, but very soon do have to answer very conclusively, is whether we want to go for the state funding option. So everything we've talked about so far tonight is just aiming for our own referendum again, where we're paying the full cost of the building. The other option, of course, is to go for state funding, and the next round of that opens up in 2024 and probably won't be finalized until 2026. And so we would have to weigh the cost of delaying another 1.5 to 2 years to wait for that answer, and the likelihood of us getting approved, which is very small chance.
Can you just take a moment, Jason, and distinguish between the state funding versus the subsidies that we were talking about a little bit earlier, where, Tyler, you were saying going above and beyond helps you
Oh,
get
sure.
more stuff. So just so people understand the difference between those two.
Maybe
You want me to rattle this off?
Scott or Tyler, whoever, please.
We've done it together, Tyler, knock yourself out.
Right. So there's two programs that the state utilizes to fund construction projects, and we've talked about both of them in the last 1.5 years. So the first one we'll talk real quick, State Revolving Renovation Fund. That's what is being used for window and ventilation upgrades at Mabel I. Wilson that are under design now. That has a cap of about $1 million per priority area. So that's really not going to help on this one. The area that Jason's referring to is what they call the Major Capital Projects Program. It's Chapter 61 of Maine statute that governs that program. They open up applications every 5 to 6 years. It takes about 6 to 8 months to get an application together, get it submitted to the state, and then their process actually involves visiting each school, and then they rank them based on the criteria in Chapter 61. That process takes about 1 year to 1.5 years. Once that ranking is done, the list is put out as a preliminary piece, and then there is a petitioning or an appeals process that you can go through if you didn't rank well. It doesn't usually end up moving you far up the list. So some of the challenges I think that you'll be wanting to just talk about and discuss as you're looking at that option is the number of schools that are likely to apply. The last list was opened in 2016. Was published in 18, 74 districts applied, 7 are likely to be funded. So as we've seen over the last 5 years in list to list, that number of funded projects has dwindled from an average of 20 to 22 down to 15 down to 7. So it's a big list. We're hearing already a lot of districts that are gearing up for this upcoming list. There's a lot of need in the state. Our firm, we've heard from 12 districts that are planning to put applications in. So it's going to be a strong list again. So the way that process works, once the list is published, the Maine State Board of Education, they meet their construction committee, and then the state board meets, and they move projects through the list in sequential order. So time-wise, I actually pulled the list and dates just for some context. The list opened in August of 18. The first 3 projects were put on the approved list in October of 2019. The first one of those projects is likely to go out to bid a year from now. So it was went to referendum for concept approval, which is basically what we had just done in this last referendum for you. Looking at a December of 2025 mid-year start date if everything goes perfectly for that first school. So it's about a 10-year process from the date of applications opening to when you actually can move into your school if you're number 1 on the list.
Yeah, and number 1 on the list, I'm sure the qualifications to be put up to number 1 are pretty
Not someplace that you usually want to be.
right.
Knob and tube wiring in the old
Yeah,
school.
it's usually some less than desirable, not only space limitations, but building quality, indoor air quality, hazardous materials, accessibility. There's a large number of things that go into this. So I think Scott from Department of Ed would tell you that it's a 10+ year on any given list before, day 1 to when you actually move into your building.
And these are very high need as far as how they get qualified.
They get ranked on a rubric, as Tyler had said, and initially, one of my interests was trying to apply for a state subsidy on this project or state funding, and the more and more that you look at the data, it becomes highly unlikely that we would ever see state funding for that in a period of time that may be worthwhile. I mean, 10 years for, trying to get a subsidized project is a long time. So, and even then, that's if you're number 1 on the list.
I'm sorry, I'm just a little aghast at how terribly that program seems to be run. If it's taking 10 years for a school building that has potential hazardous materials and air quality problems, program needs reform.
Well, some of it, think about the amount of work that you've got into this project already. So we started working on this in 2019.
Yeah.
You know, granted, we've done a couple iterations of it, but there's an extra level of process. You know, once you get on the list, it's very similar to what you're going through. It takes anywhere from, you know, a year to 18 months to go through site selection and concept. And there are a few other steps that the state requires, you know, statutory wise, but the design and construction piece of it doesn't change. So it's really that the amount of time that it takes to get through and rank all of these different applications. The other piece that I think is really hampering some of the progress that this program was able to make in years past is that they haven't raised the bond limit for the program. That's why you're seeing, you know, go from 20 to 22 schools down to 15, down to 7. So in 14 years, they haven't raised that bond cap.
So it's more, and with construction being more costly,
yes,
obviously.
so, you know, the price of projects has doubled and tripled since some of the earlier lists that we've done, and, you know, that ability to bond larger projects hasn't changed. So, you know, if you want to make a meaningful improvement to that program, you should definitely reach out to your state legislatures.
And we
that's
did,
what I was, oh, sorry.
I'm sorry, when we had applied for state funding, we were very, very low on the list the last time around, and that was back when we were taking a look at the North Yarmouth Memorial School about that time, and we were looking at applying for state funding, and even when they walked through the North Yarmouth Memorial School with it at the end of its useful life, we still were at the very low part of the list. We were, I think, like 68 or something like that on that list, or 64, something in that nature. Last time I remember that, so.
I think Jeff, I'm sorry, Ann.
Oh, I was just going to add that, yeah, I mean, I think that it would be great if all of us could reach out to our representatives and that we encourage people in the community to also do so, because I think, as I mentioned at a previous board meeting, you know, that, I mean, this is a big problem for our entire state. You know, our state does not fund new building projects effectively, and we have a lot of districts who are going to be coming up, so we can share our experience and, you know, maybe we can help.
Can I add an addendum? Congress too, because the federal government should absolutely fund this. There was a huge infrastructure bill passed, and there was $0 for new school construction and major school renovations in it. It was a huge miss. So please call your congressperson.
Call your congressman.
So again, we need to answer that question. Very, very small chance, long delay. Some people in the community will be asking us to do that regardless of the small chance, but we need to weigh all that.
Yeah, just a key point on that is if there was nothing to lose by waiting and say, heck, why not? You know, just on the off chance we get it. But there's a lot to lose. You're risking a lot by waiting that long. I mean, costs continue to go up a lot. The conditions on campus are difficult. And to start this whole process from scratch in 3 or 4 years, if we find out we don't get it.
Can you imagine what the modular and the
Big
site
risk.
cost will be
Right.
over a 10-year period?
Yep.
So,
The other thing I wanted to add was the, Tyler, you're mentioning the cost that have increased. I mean, we've mentioned it kind of casually, but if we could have specific reference to how it's doubled, tripled in that list we were making before, that would be good for people to see, because many people said, like, oh, it just costs too much. Like, we were touching on that before. It's a Taj Mahal or whatever. But I think if we point out that's what it costs now, even from an elementary school.
Tyler, you have firsthand knowledge of the Camden Rockport project, right? Which failed the first time and then the second time. Can you take us through very roughly that sequence and what happened with the cost in the second vote?
So that was another locally funded project. It's about an 80,000 square foot middle school up in Camden. We went through a very similar process as we did here. So a lot of public forums, community input, a lot of presentations, got that information out there. So the first vote was in, they actually did a special election in February of 2015, and it was shot down. After that time, they spent about 1.5 to 2 years going through a very similar process where they went out and talked to everybody. They had surveys done. They spoke to all of the groups, and they actually heard some feedback saying, you know, this one part of this project, it was essentially a 2-building project, you know, new middle school and the renovation of a historic school that was attached to their old one that we were in the process of demolishing. They actually elected to take the MET project out, that small historic renovation, and then go out to referendum again in 2017, where it passed. In that time, the cost in that 2.5 years had gone from about 24.1 up to a little over $31 million. And then right before the referendum there, the kind of the pivot that we had is a pretty loud group of citizens came out to support the MET. Directly after that referendum, we went back out again for another $5.4 million to renovate the MET project. And in the end, we did exactly what we set out to do in 2015 for about $9 million more.
It's like 40% more.
Yeah. And that was just about a 2-year delay. So it's
It's a bad story, and yet it's a good story for
Yeah,
our
it's-
purposes.
Well, and that reminded me, part of this was some renovations to MIW as well, but we didn't really hear anything about that aspect of the,
Yeah, there was a
Referendum.
couple, what was the cost of that, Scott? Do you remember the?
2.3 million, and that covered a lot of things that would be needed to, change kindergarten toilets to be appropriately sized for middle school, or 4 or
Getting the
5.
stage out and the.
Getting the stage out, getting an
common
appropriate sized
areas and-
cafeteria, finishing up the windows. So it was a lot of deferred maintenance and other pieces that, we're going to continue helping you chip away at through revolving fund and other programs. So some of that work is happening regardless.
Kim, did anyone bring that up?
No, the Mabel Wilson stuff, I heard more like, well, if you're gonna renovate Mabel Wilson, then why not add another story to it so that you could increase the capacity. Just put it, just
A third story.
plop another story on top. And several people who are engineering minded in the community were great about stepping up and very patiently explaining what you'd have to do to the footprint of the building in order to really make those changes. So I think for the most part, the community was good with the changes that had to be made, unless they just didn't want the project at all because they really wanted to see Mabel Wilson completely changed. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Plus, there's an age group restriction on how many levels they can go up.
Yeah, it's certain age groups at certain levels of a building.
Yeah, within a building, too.
Within a building, yeah.
And honestly, like, I've just been trying to picture how stretched we already are on for space in the on the campus to think about a major building project going on, over a couple years while.
Well, you would have, if you did anything like that, you would have modulars all over this place trying to figure it out and bussing kids off site to modulars or, I mean, I just can't imagine what the construction would look like around that and trying to take wings of that building and deal with that. So I think it'd be a pretty huge project.
Yeah, I mean,
Show
I've
you
been
some
involved
photos
in a
from
project
Camden.
like
What's that?
that.
We can show you some photos for Camden.
Yeah,
We
I
built
was gonna say it'd be a pretty large project.
it's a challenge.
It would probably be more expensive. Yeah. So maybe just kind of off of that, and Jason, if we're getting off track, just we can table this. But several folks, November 9th, were saying, "Okay, back to the drawing board, back to the drawing board, back to the drawing board." And I feel like we, through this workshop, were either, how do we get this new school built that's similar, if not what we already have planned, or modulars forever. Is there any merit in going back to the drawing board, trying to think outside the box, trying to come up with other solutions, such as adding another story to Mabel Wilson? And I'm asking this for the sake of the community who has asked this. Yeah.
So the next question is where, which also affects when. But since we're on this topic, Tyler, I have my own ideas, having spent some time in the construction business, but can you talk broadly about cost per square foot of building new versus cost of additions if you're doing large amounts?
So typically the cost of the actual construction of the new square footage is very similar. The challenge with additions is that you have infrastructure and other components that, regardless if you're just putting a small addition on, that you're going to be doing anyway. So you're going to have temporary facilities, you're going to be moving kids, you're going to be moving utilities, you're going to be doing shutdowns. And that typically starts to balance or to offset some of any savings that you get on renovation and addition savings there. The minute that you start adding portables to support construction projects, it just, as you know, having kind of experienced this on your short-term plan, it drives your cost up quite a bit. And then there's a disruption of the educational process as well. That's a big piece that we hear, and it's even a challenge when we're building new on the same campus. So we've done that a couple times. We did it at Amanda Rowe in Portland. We built a new 85,000 square foot school next to an occupied building for about 2 years. And it was a challenge. So those things all add to the incremental cost differential. So you really don't end up saving a lot to do an addition.
Okay, appreciate that, thank you. So the next question is the where. So this is the big question. So right now we have a site that we have a concept design for that's more or less paid for, figured out. Yes, we could alter it at 80 Gray Road. So the question is whether we use that one or we try to do something else on a different site and the costs related to that. So conversations with Tyler that we've had recently, what do you think that does, Tyler, to the time frame if we start on a new site? And I think you've already sort of answered it tonight. But
Yeah, so some of the things process-wise that take a lot of time is a lot of the initial data gathering that we do. So depending on where the site is, it's getting a topographic or boundary survey. It's investigating all of the utilities, so power, sewer, or subsurface, depending on where it is located in one of the two towns. And then also geotechnical explorations, wetland delineations. All of these things that have happened out on 80 Gray Road would be replicated, and there's both a time and an expense associated with that. If sites are previously developed, you'll end up with either a phase 1 or a phase 2 site assessment where they're looking at things like former underground oil tanks or other contaminants that may be out there. So all of this due diligence to find out what's below the ground and can't be seen, that will have a major impact on your overall construction process. If we're staying with a very similar building program, we have a lot of information for that. So we understand the grade levels that are going in here, their space needs. So that saves you quite a bit of time. If you end up evaluating neighborhood schools, we end up starting that process over. So we begin to, look at interviews with staff again, start to build out that space workbook and understand how a neighborhood school would function that would be different. And it would also involve likely taking a look at making sure Mableye could support the kids that would remain, if it's a Cumberland versus North Yarmouth split. From there, based on the amount of time, you're probably looking at a year of design. So getting through the site design, doing all of the different public forums to educate the community on what's being proposed, and then going back out to the concept design as well. So all told, probably 18 months plus. And the expense can vary pretty wildly based on the size. So that's the time
expense. And then significant difference in cost in architectural fees, right? Because if I remember right, we did the campus project, which I want to say was like $250 to Oak Point, and then when we moved to 80 Gray Road, as I remember, you guys did a pretty good deal on that. Like it was like another 100 or so incremental on top.
I don't remember all, but you're in the ballpark. So a big expense on 80 Gray Road was getting our survey, wetlands, and geotechnical work done, which are all subconsultants to us. It's not a service that we provide, so those costs kind of shift. We did the same thing here on the campus as well. We had survey and geotech done on the campus to understand what we were kind of looking at for soil conditions on the proposed parcels that were under contract. So yeah, anywhere from a new site that we have no information on, you're probably looking at, in today's dollars, $250 to $350.
And the cost to alter and upgrade or change, modify 80 Gray Road, I'm guessing
it's pretty minor at this point. And if you stay with your concept plan, maybe make a few changes, take a classroom in and out. If we take a look at some materials, you're not looking at a whole lot. We have a lot of good information, a lot of, the groundwork is there. So it's more of a fine-tuning, massaging than a starting over.
okay.
Can I just add that the 18 months you were talking about, though, Tyler, that really doesn't talk about the time it takes to find the right property.
Correct. That's from
Because
identify, selecting
that
a
was a long
site.
process
Yep.
for the first time around, very long. I
Yes.
remember we went through 3 iterations, but there's also a long period of time where we're looking and looking and looking.
Yep.
So again, I'll point out that in my mind anyway, that the 80 Gray Road site is sort of the default site. Everything that we can find, might find, is compared to that. Is it better, all things considered? And it's
So
not
to-
a perfect site, but it's a good site.
So
in
from
someplace.
what I'm gathering to date, we've probably spent like $400,000 in this whole process since 2019 plus.
If you go back and include the earlier rounds, you're probably up around 500 or
Yeah,
more.
I was gonna say it was probably close to $500,000.
So we're at
with
500.
all of the fees, et cetera.
So we're at $500,000, just say. And if we decide a new location, a new potential school design, because I'm sure not all schools can be picked up and dropped into the same site location if there's different variables there. So we're looking at, if we decide to not stay with 80 Gray Road, spending over $1 million, another $500,000.
Oh.
If we're
Another-
basically starting
Another
from
250
scratch.
to
Yeah.
350 is what he said.
Yeah, that
250
half
to 350.
half million plus is almost 3 concept designs.
Okay.
So we got about 50% of the way through on the Memorial School site. We had a lot of the survey, geotech. We had actually some concept floor plans, and we were probably about halfway through that process. We were all the way through the process on the campus, and then all the way through on this one. And it's not a huge amount, but the way that we write our contracts for concept design is we carry forward the work that would normally happen and do a small credit back. So there's probably $75,000 to $80,000 that will be credited toward the design contract for work that's been completed.
It was a very fair contract, so thank you.
We tried.
So if we went for a new land and potentially a new building,
Yeah, you don't know what the site costs are gonna look
Yeah.
like. I mean, the 250 to 350 he's mentioned, that's just architectural fees, so you don't know the difference in cost for the
So-
land, could be more, could be less. Site costs could be worse, could be better.
so
But,
potentially we could be spending an additional,
oh, yes, yep. The
So-
big thing is the 18 months to 2 years additional time frame. Yep.
We'd also acquired that property right prior to the big growth that was going on, or the boom, the real estate piece. So we actually entered into that option agreement right before you started seeing as much construction as there was.
Oh, I don't think you'll have any trouble getting rid of it if we don't take it.
Oh, no, maybe we'll just buy the option.
So, as you can see, the where affects the when very much. So we gotta answer that very soon, when and where. Okay, so next thing on the agenda is moving forward in the process. So we've talked tonight about public engagement, a potential survey, listening sessions, could certainly be part of that, and reaching out, and lots of overlap. A much longer time frame as far as communication. I have 6 to 9 months in my mind, which dovetails very well if you do a June referendum, or potentially you could do slightly earlier, and it still overlaps with the school year. What I would like to avoid is a November referendum where nobody's paying attention during the summer, and you come back and it's a bad rush, and you get the same situation again, that everybody was enjoying summer and not asking the questions, and now you only get 2 months to answer all those questions.
And it's really not even 2 months, it's really 3 to 4 weeks, because you got so many people voting absentee now,
Yep.
as well.
Yep.
Good point.
So, further moving forward things here, so a building committee, we will have to, of course, form another building committee.
Jason,
Yes,
before you go to that,
yep,
I wonder on the public engagement piece,
yep.
could we actually, I don't know, move towards almost decision? Like, I know it's a workshop, we're not like voting on things, but I think we shouldn't say potential survey. I think we should do a survey. We shouldn't say potential listening sessions. We should do listening sessions. And I think this all needs to be done between now and June.
Yep.
I want to put that out there.
Yep, I'm not against either of those things. That's my default way, I guess, of saying it.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I just want to like publicly be like, let's just do this.
In the chair, I'm just supposed to be a facilitator. Okay. Building committee, we will need a new one. The questions that I've heard, or the concern that I've heard is when do we bring that building committee in? What is a board decision versus what is the building committee doing? So we need to discuss that more. Like, we'd figure out the when and the where, and then the building committee does this. And so a clear definition of the charge, I guess, because you were saying that early on in the last round that it sort of got out of control and the committee was trying to do decide things that really would have sort of landed at the board.
Well, no, I think it was just more, it was such a tight time frame. I mean, that's kind of like where does the committee fit in at what time? And it was such a short.
Not on this one. I think I'm talking back to the campus one.
Oh, the campus project, yeah. Yeah, I'm trying to remember back, that was a ways.
There wasn't really a building committee. It was for the North Yarmouth site.
Right, we didn't really have a building committee for that one.
Just for the first one.
Yeah, that's right. We did have a large building committee for the North Yarmouth site. That's right. We had like 18 people on it. And it was very robust, and it was a lot of people, it was a lot of activity. Every role was represented you could think of. It was a little bit, I don't think it was unwieldy, but it went on for a while. That committee did meet for a long time. And there was a lot of decisions that were made by the group, and then Oak Point would go back and then bring it back. I mean, I thought it worked okay, but you had to define what that 18-member group was doing. Mm-hmm. And then we didn't have a building committee at all during the site on campus. And then obviously we restarted a building committee with several people for this particular one. But yes, going back to that one.
Well, we had a lot of information out of the first building committee for what the grade configurations were in those pieces, I believe, that came out of that first committee, the steering committee.
That preceded that. So we've had a steering committee.
So we've had a number of things.
That was designed by came out of the strategic plan. Then we had a building committee for what we thought was going to be the site behind the community center. And then we didn't have anything for the site here, and then we restarted that. So yes, there's been different iterations. But the biggest one and the most active one, was a steering committee followed by the North Yarmouth site with 18 people on it. A lot of people who were on the steering committee ended up also being on the North Yarmouth site. Actually, Tom, you were on that one, that 18-member group.
Yeah, I was on as a parent rep.
Is there ways that we could also, I mean, that would seem like those are good individuals or good groups just to continue to, build buy-in and support. They've been involved in the past. Like, how can we bring more people back into these conversations so we can get to a place where, I know we use the word marketing communications a lot, but I really think of it as buy-in and support for what the district needs and how we need to move forward in our communities versus like selling them on something. And so I would love to, go back and revisit individuals who have been engaged in the past because we know they're interested, and then, what other groups can we bring in from our communities that would help?
I will say, in hindsight, that you raise a good point. It kind of thinks, if we're thinking about a building committee, it was helpful that we had a select board member from North Yarmouth on the committee back in North Yarmouth. We had a counselor from the town council in Cumberland. We had several board members, obviously. We had staff, we had parents, we had community members that did not have children. I think we had 2 on the committee. We had a student. We really had, that's why there's 18 people, quite frankly. We should have had somebody from the water district on there. But we did have everybody under the sun, and I think it actually was helpful to have all those roles in the same room, even though it felt a little unwieldy, but it was helpful. I don't know, from the architectural lens, Tyler, you worked with that group. You came to all their meetings. How did you feel that worked?
As long as the committee has a clear charge, it doesn't impact us a lot. So we're going to take feedback. We're used to working with large groups and trying to focus, kind of a diverse range of opinions and thoughts on things. So we're used to that. I think the benefit to it is always that, you have a liaison to the community, that you have people on your committee that are going to bump into people at the grocery store, at the gas station, and they're able to answer questions kind of on the fly. So making sure that we can tailor information to be the right information, so that you're kind of eliminating some of that.
I have to agree with that, because I know when we're looking at the North Yarmouth site, one of the things I thought was really helpful is that we had the chair of the North Yarmouth Select Board was on the building committee.
Yeah.
So he was providing all this information on a pretty regular basis to the select board where we were trying to put the school. And I actually, until COVID happened, and that's a whole nother matter, I felt the communication, at least on that end, was going pretty smoothly. So that is something that I think is important, to think about the roles that we'd have. And I think even though it's 18 people or 20 people or whatever it is, I think it might be worth it.
I would imagine that charge would, depending on if we stayed with 80 Gray Road site or not, that charge could look significantly different.
Yep, agreed.
Because there's obviously less to do with the 80 Gray Road site than there would be on a new site, so.
And
Yep.
communication, I think, would be a huge
Yeah.
charge, is who are you going back to if you've got a select board member or a counselor? They're going back and giving this information, getting more information, bringing it back. You know, a group that nobody has, you know, maybe they're empty nesters, a community member that does not have children, they've got a group that they're connected to. I think that is helpful. That's my opinion. But
Tyler, do you have documents from other projects where they define that?
Yeah, I can take a look.
I think that'd be helpful, so that they know exactly what we're asking. I agree. Stakeholders from various groups in the two towns is going to be super important.
Staff members who live in the towns would be really good too.
we had like 4 staff members, I think, that
Yeah,
were on there.
because they're taxpayers and they're staff members,
Yes.
so that's
Yeah.
helpful. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
Okay. Yeah, I think if we can use a third party for the marketing side of things, then I think that sort of frees up the committee to really focus on the building and just and I think if we bring in some of the engineer type people earlier in the process, that'll help bring confidence to the project. There'll be more people that can speak about this is what we did, you know, and just the smart things. Because I think there was a lot of question from people about, well, this is a concept design and you haven't really dug in. They were asking more detailed questions. So I think if we can answer some of that by having those people in the room earlier in the process, I think that'll help give the project more confidence.
Yeah, and whoever the PR, if the board elects to go with a third-party person outside, that person should be coming to the meetings, the building committee meetings, because a lot of what they're communicating and imparting are ideas that come out of this, whether it's just putting out, this is what the committee was working on, this is what the architect's working on. They're very much part of that discussion. I think that really makes sense. Obviously, the architect should be sitting there as well as part at all these meetings.
Yeah, they should be there. We can't summarize a meeting and then get all the value out of it. They need to be there for sure. You reached out to one company, right? Dovetail?
We have reached out to one company just to get information, but we don't, just to try to see what kind of things that they would provide a district
Yep.
on something like this.
It was the company that did the Portland Museum of Art's website, which I mentioned earlier. Okay, building committee.
While you're looking that up, sorry.
Go for it.
While I think that there is value, this is very different than a Portland Museum of Art, where people are voluntarily, who have a passion for that, who are philanthropists or donors, whereas we are dealing with a very different population. I'd just like to put out there that I think the best way to get this passed is almost door to door. I mean, we as a board would have to put in the time to go to people and talk to them. I genuinely believe that's going to be more effective than a glossy website or mailers or whatever. And I'm not saying that there's not merit to that. I just want to be careful that we don't invest so much in a professional that we kind of forget that really this is about our fellow taxpayer, our neighbors, our friends, and that nothing beats face-to-face.
Well, and also, I mean, I think too, it's important, you know, since we've talked about this historical lack of trust that there are between some community members and the district. And, you know, while I think there are advantages to considering an outside PR person, what message could that also potentially send depending on how that messaging and marketing is being done? Yeah, like I would want someone who specializes, who like does this for towns and schools, not so much, you know, for nonprofits like the PMA, even though they did do a great job for that project, but it is a very different project. So I think, you know, these are just things that we need to consider, and I agree, you know, how we as a board can do things differently moving forward, this next time around.
To that point, is it possible to find someone in Cumberland who is vested in this project and they professionally know PR?
Or North Yarmouth.
Or North Carolina? Yep.
Leanne's earning her votes over there.
I think we should
We did
do-
have someone, oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was going to say, we did have somebody, Marnie Dean, who obviously used to be a television reporter locally, but, and she does PR and all that, and she basically gifted her time and energy in putting together a video. I know that, you know, we've got to have more than that, but that was one piece. I think some sort of PR, you know, there's third-party stuff that can be done to get information out. But I also kind of agree with Kim that if we had an 18, I keep saying 18 because that's what we had before, 18 member, where people are like if the town councilor who's on there goes back to the town council and is giving regular updates there, if somebody who is representing younger, you know, parents, maybe who don't have children in the community yet, they're going back to groups that they work, you know, that they are affiliated with and saying, hey, this is what we're doing on the committee. I'm your representative. And these are people that are willing to do those things. I do think the word gets around. I think that will help. And I think a PR firm might help with maybe we want to put something in the forecaster at some point, a one-page thing. Let's get it out there. Somebody could help us. A third party could help us.
You'd have direct mail, you'd have email.
What's that?
I also
Direct
think
mail,
a-
email,
Or
things
we
for our
have- we have that
website, all
too.
kinds of things that we would need to have.
Those kind of third-party things,
Which a
but I.
PR firm would certainly help with, or a communications firm basically is
Right.
what you're looking for.
Right, but I think, you know, the local part of having that committee, you know, a robust building committee where people know what their role is. Their role is to go back and talk to the groups that they represent and get that information out, and they're willing to do it.
Champions.
You know, that could be very effective.
And I think with our town's history, having an unbiased third-party PR firm outside is beneficial sometimes because they have a fresh perspective. They're not in it like we're in it. They don't feel the feels. They can take a very high-level view and be like, oh, this is how you're going to do this to get this done, and go to those meetings and say, this is how you communicate. This is the best way to do it, instead of hiring someone local. That's my perspective.
I think it's not a either or thing. It's a both. I think everybody at this table and the people in that building committee, it's all of our jobs to push that information out and have those face-to-face conversations. But this is one thing I feel strongly about, that we need some professional, third-party, unbiased help to make sure that we do it right in a repetitive manner at the right times and pushing out the right information to hit the most people, because the approach of us talking to everybody, it's not scalable. We're volunteers. We only have so much time in the day. We only see so many people. What the pros can do and the technology and tools to do it, they can be sure that they hit most people. So I don't think it's an either or thing. I think we should do both, and certainly we can interview lots of companies and find the right fit. I just threw out PMA because their website was
You
great.
don't have any PR firms that have worked with schools and districts and
I can look back. We've done this a couple times. We've done some work with a
You know,
There's a polling company in Portland when we did some work for Portland Public Schools. So let me dig through my notes.
okay.
Just so I think I'm cool with where this is going. I was a little bit hesitant, just this notion of discussing this as marketing and PR, because this is not it can't be a sales job.
I agree.
It's community outreach, and it's getting, you said getting buy-in, Leanne. It's where it is, and that's to Kim's point. That's knocking on a door and talking to somebody face to face. But you're right, Jason, too, that it's both. We need that construct there. The other thing around the committee is just, I worry. Setting up a committee is usually just a way to delay things, and so even if it's not intentional, and so that's the only thing is, like, if we have good intentions, I'm like, yeah, this is a great committee, and 18 months later it's still committee meetings, and what the hell are we doing? And so that's the only really significant nervousness from me on that, going back to a committee.
What if we take Jeff's observation and handpick or whatever process that everybody wants to do on, this is a group of people aging, this is a group of people, the teachers, this is a group of people, and have a representative from all those groups of people, and that's something that can get done real quickly.
I think that helps.
And not look for an architect or someone who's done building before, or someone that committee is just solely focused to get the word out to those groups.
Yeah, and I think I agree, Mike. Sometimes committees do delay things, but I think if the committee knew exactly, this is your timeline, you're only meeting for this period of time, whether it's 6 months or whatever, and this is what your charge is. This is what you're doing. You're helping the architect to make sure that if this is the same project, that this is what we want the project to be, and communication or whatever it is, and your role is to help group that you represent. Obviously these are people that have some sort of connection, and work with a PR person to help do some PR stuff to make sure we get the PR stuff out. They knew exactly what it is, and that's really tight. I don't think it should be a committee. I think we tell them when the committee's going to sunset, basically, right from the beginning, and not say, well, come back to us when you're done. Come back to the board when you're done. I think it's right from the get-go. Because I agree, and we don't want to start over either. We've already had committees. Mm-hmm. We've already had a steering committee. We already had a building committee. We don't want to start over. We just want to help shepherd this project through.
Okay.
But, yeah.
I just want to add to his point about the PR. I just want to be sure we and the public understands we're not trying to just push something or sell something. We want to inform. We want informed voters. Mm-hmm. And yes, they're deciding. I mean, we're putting whatever we end up putting forward, whatever place or whatever, as our best decision, but they decide. But we need we may need the help of the third party PR, because it is so difficult to stay ahead of those who think they know, the rumors, the Facebook, all that. We couldn't stay ahead of that last time. As fast as Kim peddled and everybody else worked at it, I don't want to be shot down by that again. We need something really strong that keeps pushing out that information. Otherwise, all for naught.
So,
Well said.
in the short term, because I always like to have next goals, when are we gonna decide if it's gonna be
which part?
50 Gray Road? When are we gonna decide?
It's definitely not going to be 50 Gray Road, 80 Gray Road.
80 Gray Road.
Oh, is there a new property?
Whoever lives at 50
sorry,
Gray
I
Road.
just 50 Gray Road.
Vanessa would like to buy your property.
I'd like to buy your property, thank you. Like, when, is there a timeline for that, just to make that decision
You tell me, next meeting?
now?
We committed that there was going to
Okay.
be no decisions made tonight, so.
Right. And what information do us as board members feel that we need to have to be able to make that decision? I mean, I found tonight extremely helpful myself, but I think we need to understand, like, do we have to have more community input to make that particular decision?
What's the point of doing a survey if we're just gonna go ahead with whatever we wanna do as a group?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we need to get information out before we do the survey, because if we do a survey right away, we're just going to get the same confused. I don't know why you're doing this or that because they don't have the right answers yet. Many do, many don't yet.
Are we at a point at our agenda where we could take public comment?
No.
This gentleman who was sat here for
No,
2.5
there's
hours.
To all this.
Or-
I'll make a couple of comments.
Dave, please step up to
For
the
the
mic
people.
if you would. So
The millions of people online can
I
hear
know. Yeah, what's our count?
right over there.
the microphone. Yeah.
Introduce yourself if you would, please.
I'm David Laughlin. I do live in North Yarmouth. Somebody had asked me to be here.
Step up to the mic, please.
microphone, the podium. Yeah.
No one at home can hear.
My name's Dave McLaughlin. I live on Stolbrook in North Yarmouth. Somebody asked me to be here and be a little more involved. I'll just 1 minute on my background before I make a comment. I'm retired, so I have no kids in school. I do currently consult. I consult for Greater Portland Council of Governments in the City of Portland on loan requests. I retired. I was a senior lender out of Camden National, retired out of there. And then I spent a stint at FAME. I was the first director of lending and, matter of fact, set up the IRB programs and so on and so forth. But I did make a couple of observations tonight. You know, the first, when I looked at it, I go, is this the Taj Mahal? It took me all of about 10 minutes, maybe 15 or 20, say, no, it's not the Taj Mahal. It's easy. And all you got to do is just do it per unit, do per student and per square foot, and compare to 5 other schools. Put that on a piece of paper about this big, about this wide across, and you'll take that completely out of play. Because that did cross my mind. Now the bond rate, you got to move in target, and I think that gets into why people haven't, you know, why you got the no vote. I really believe in the uncertainty. Now I think there's one thing that could be done on the uncertainty, because what's uncertain? The cost of the school? Yeah, you know, costs are up and everything, but there's one thing I think that could help out a lot, or would have helped out in a summary. If you tell me your taxes are going to go up 11%, but they won't go over 13%, you take uncertainty completely out of play. And when somebody's out there in an inflationary market, my mother was still here, you know, sold the, you know, on the family farm, but couldn't pay the increased taxes. That would factor in her mind. I don't know how many people are out there in the community that are like that, but I don't know if you need to do it. I would have done a survey right away. I don't know if you need to. I think you've answered a lot of the questions. And the uncertainty is in an inflationary economy. When costs are going up, you see the school gets up. People are always, they're trained not to spend money. They're not spending money at home. They probably don't want to spend money. You tell them it's 11%, and it won't go over 13. These are just examples. I think you take that right out of play. Because when I looked at the project, and my background is I look at large projects. I'm used to this stuff. I couldn't pick it out very easily what the cost was. So that uncertainty was there. I think if you did that, and you did the Taj Mahal, you take that out of play, I'm not so uncertain this wouldn't go to a yes vote fairly quickly. I don't think the problems are in the project. I think the problems are in the economy, things beyond your control. You say there's a distrust. There shouldn't be any distrust between the community and you people. They don't trust the economy. They don't trust what we're facing out there. So that's an unbiased observation tonight, listening to you. I hope it's helpful, but I really believe in those 2 principles. And that's because I do go before board of directors. I have to get these things approved. I think if you use that per square foot and that per student, and you come out with the cost certainty, I think you could get a pretty big swing just on those 2 factors alone. So hopefully that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dave.
Just want to add one thing that
Go for
was
it.
very helpful, but I was less involved in all of the background work over the last few years, so I didn't know as much as the other board members. So after the referendum failed, I had a conversation with a couple of community members who were very against it, and they gave their reasons, and they had what seemed like good reasons to me, because I didn't have all the same facts that some other members of the board have. hearing everything tonight and what I've learned since then tells me that I think the original thought process was sound. And I think a lot of the concerns that were raised to me by community members I spoke with right after the referendum, actually, with further digging, I think that they would see that actually, you know, questions such as, well, why can't we find 5 acres along Greeley Road or along Tuttle? Well, we know now we need 15 to 20 acres, and even if we went that path and we found 15 to 20 acres, it would be 18 more months before we knew what the cost of that project would be. It's a long way of saying that I think the facts are actually on the side of the original plan. And so it's just a matter of how quickly you can get that information out to folks.
Well said, Jared. Thank you. So continuing the thought of third-party help. So one of the other things, if we pivot away from 80 Gray Road, we will have to decide whether we want to keep the same architect or go with somebody else. Tyler and Oak Point have served us very well, but that is one of the things that we'll have to answer. Marketing and communication, or whatever we want to call it, because I agree that that doesn't sound great. Community outreach, fact providing, informing, whatever. That was certainly a bottleneck last time. That is one that I feel very strongly about, that we need help. A survey, whether that's done by a company, a third-party company, potentially the same company as the marketing, communications, PR company. We needed to decide that. And then something else that we've talked about, we were going to very likely do if the referendum had passed, was an owner's rep. And I wonder if we should have that conversation earlier and when we would potentially bring that person in. Because again, I guess it depends on whether, if we pivot away from 80 Gray Road, because the workload looks a lot different. But when would we want to involve that person potentially? And I'm sort of in favor of that, because I just see this as a big lift, and having outside help that is paid and not a volunteer, it's going to run much better.
Can we do it? I mean,
Go ahead.
to, oh my God, Tom's point, if we all agree, not now, I'm not holding anyone to their, but if we all agree we're going to stay with 80 Gray Road and the building design, that it's a sound decision. It was a sound decision when we put it to referendum. It's still a sound decision. I think this gentleman's point were very valid, to give them, your tax is going to be X, it's not going to go over X. That we're standing behind our since 2019 process, that we've come to this, we've shown the history of it. I don't think we need to reinvent the wheel, but that's where I stand on that. I mean, we've been doing this probably since 2018, thinking about it, at least Scott and Jeff have. And all those other things are ancillaries to, are we gonna move forward with this? And how strongly we feel. I feel as strongly about right now putting it to referendum as I did back then. All the work that was done up until the point when I got on the board. And now, to Jared's point, he feels now comfortable that this is our sound decision. But that's my 2 cents.
And I think the only other question that I would ask about 80 Gray Road, because I know it's been asked, is just, is there any opportunity to save money based on the plan that was put forward? And I think that we've offered up details about what those costs are, and like, I don't know at this point where, if there are areas that exist that could be considered that could save money, but we need to ask that question, I think, one more time.
And I think Tyler was always very clear, at least to me, I understood that you were always clear that the building materials and the stone amphitheater was all variables. This is the big ask, but we can, those things are, that can be changed.
Like what percentage? Like,
Yeah.
like 2 to 5%, that's really, you know, optional, nice to have, or is there just something that we haven't ask for to reconsider that would really impact the overall cost?
Which
Yeah,
you
I-
don't have to answer now.
Which
Or you can.
I wasn't planning. So I can certainly take it back to our team, so we can take a hard look at what is in there and make some recommendations. I mean, really, what you're going to give up, Jason summed up well. It's square footage. Square footage is what drives this.
Okay.
I actually took a look at the stone amphitheater. It's about $65,000. We can take it out. It's
Yeah.
it's something that can be added in the future. We hear things about blue panels, stone panels.
0.01% of the cost.
What's that?
0.01%
Yeah.
of the cost.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
I mean, these
Yeah.
these are the things that I think
Broken out over
communication goes a
20
long way
years
to help.
bond.
Yeah,
Right.
okay.
But
So
just
we can
saying
certainly
we've
take a look
asked and
at
we've looked
those
and-
things,
yep.
and I can take our space workbook. We have a summary of every space that's in the building. We can add a column to compare it to what the state standard is to give you a little bit more justification. We can make sure that we're tracking on the right enrollment projections. We can
Yeah.
compare some of the data to what you're seeing for actual enrollments, and just start to gut check some of these things. So we'd be happy to take a look at some of those things. I'm going to guess that you're not going to see massive
Yeah.
amounts of savings. I'm hoping that we can identify some things to keep it close to what it was before, to offset some of the increases that you're going to see. I mean, you're looking at 6% going up if you're out another year from this time. So, that's going to be the challenge, is that you're going to take things out and it still may be more expensive than where it was this past November.
I thought it was well said, Tyler, that it's really about square footage.
Yeah.
It really isn't about the materials that are being used or how we're building that or how you've designed a circular front as opposed to a square front. It's all about the square footage of the building.
Yep.
So,
And I love
And-
that per unit, that
Yeah.
comparison. I think
And
that'd be really helpful.
for the number of students we have, and for building so we have capacity in the future, that's the square footage that we need.
The thing I'm worried about most is that we trim 10% off the cost and do it in such a way that we are very disappointed with what we end up with.
Agree.
In my experience, when you're building something, it's that last 10% that makes it go from good to great.
And this is the cheapest time to do it with a project at the new build, to make those investments than it is to go back and do it.
Well, it's where does the money come from at a later date?
Yeah.
You're bonding it over 20 years.
Yeah.
So how do you fund that out of your reserves or fund those types of things in the future if you want to do them? It gets more difficult.
I think we have a vote.
I
I'm not gonna push. I won't
No,
push.
we're not, no.
I'll counter you, Vanessa, with, I mean, I want to get a new school going as fast as we can. But I'm just still concerned that until we get some more information out there,
Is it information out there or is it information gathering? I guess that's where we're like flip-flopping on that. Is it getting the information out there or is it getting the information from the
in my
community?
view, we need to get more information out there, answers to these questions, like, because there are still people out there saying what they were saying after the referendum when it failed. Like, I didn't like it because I mean, just this week I've had a few people like like, okay. So some of them, some of them are hardened and we can never change their minds, and some of them just need more information. So I feel like we need to get more information out first, and then if we want to do a survey or not, but I just don't feel we should decide to, let's do 80 gray, because then we'll be accused of that was our plan all along when we put the option out, which I don't think that was our plan all along. It's a backstop. So I want people to have a chance to learn more, and I'd love to have a chance to find out before we keep going down one road, like, okay, are they behind us this time?
And I'll say this, probably we'll regret it later at some point. This is an open workshop, and we had one gentleman show up. So that's where I feel like as a board, as leaders of the board selected from the community, we should be saying, this was a good decision 6 months ago. It's a good decision now. And here are more facts, the same facts that Kim gave you. I don't think any of these facts have changed other than they're more organized. That she has made, I mean, I don't mean more organized, but they're now in one place instead of, and that's how.
I agree.
This is a workshop that we have publicly advertised over and over and over again. I mean, it's been out there, it's been on the newsletter.
Yeah, I would say, and I mean, I'll probably regret my words too, so we can regret our words together, but I think if we had 4 more weeks, we might have been able to convince more people that it was
Yeah.
a yes. And I agree with Christina that we have to get information out about things that I mean, this group has heard a lot of stuff. I mean, you've heard a lot of collective information. I've heard stuff too, but you hear more about what were the concerns. Let's put some of this information out, because I do worry. I'm in favor of a survey, but I worry that if we put a survey out, it will be without the information that we're trying to get out now before people have a chance to answer that survey and really give us their opinion. And they might have a different answer. They might say, okay, 80 Gray Road makes sense. They've put a lot of information in. Jason, you started a document that's got, I think, could be a really good document to have out there with all the links and everything in there in one place. Here, go look at it, and FAQs that we could update. I noticed that people kept trying to access the FAQs right away from the old project, so that means people are starting to engage again on this. I do think putting information out is like really important, but obviously we have to ask the question, is it information about 80 Gray Road? Which, if that is still the plan, if that's still what the board wants to do, that would be the information we're trying to get out, along with other information that's not pertinent just to 80 Gray Road.
So, Jeff, can I make it to that? Because I think it's a really good point, and sort of pivoted me in your answer earlier around committee helped. This to me then, because I hear what Christina's saying as well, lends us to setting up that committee that's representative of key folks in this community to really start to get that information out, not just putting it on the website and hoping people look at it, but actually like dragging people into a room who are connected to others and making them listen, and making sure that happens. And maybe even sending 1 or 2 of us to town council meeting, to the select board meeting, to the Aging in Place Committee, to the library, to wherever over the next 4 to 6 weeks, and then reconvening back here to start thinking about decisions. Or getting the process towards decisions.
But what would we, like Jeff's point, what would we be communicating at those?
Everything that we've collected tonight.
So it would be about 80 Gray Road and the failed referendum.
The history and the failed referendum, the background of what it takes to build a school, trying to answer all of these questions and clarifying things. 80 Gray Road is underlying that, but making the point that, this is what we're working with. If you want to do something different, 18 months just to design it, not including finding the place and going into an option and things like that, and just being able to lay all that out there. We could even conceivably do a webinar that's just presenting that. Again, I mean, like, you could just watch this, people could, but who wants to sit through 2 hours of me interjecting stupid things when we could have a structured webinar or something like that too.
Yeah, I like the idea of a webinar, or even I know that, I prefer in-person meetings because they're just so much nicer. But I do think we have to give people other options to, like virtual, whether it's a webinar or come, meet with us at 6 o'clock, but it's virtual and you can make dinner while you're watching us.
I think that,
I think we're going to have to do that a little bit more to get
I think
people.
that's true. I think I would think we've all heard a fair number of people who've said, like, I just can't make these meetings at night. It's dinner time. It's bedtime.
Yeah.
I'm out of town. I'm a whatever.
Or we know that they're watching at home during this time. But I mean, it is hard to show up here.
But to your point, it's hard to do it for 2.5, going on 3 hours straight. So a webinar might be. We have a volunteer, I think.
Yes, I think webinars can be really cool.
The great thing about a webinar, or even going, in person to some of these meetings, we can always just record a small clip that gets played and then be there in person as well. So that person doesn't necessarily feel like they need to be the one, like, I would almost see like reading through the timeline of what got us to this point and then making a few of the key points and having some of these graphics that have been developed or we want to develop. But I think there's just a lot of opportunity to do that outreach and, go to some of those places where, other people are paying more attention to. I had one other question though, going back to, what is the timeline and cost for putting out an RFP? Just to do the due diligence of, is there anything else?
You mean on property?
for property.
Oh, we've written it once.
Yeah.
We have an
have a
actual,
template on it.
essentially an information packet and an article or an advertisement that we put in the newspaper in 2021. So I think we've got that somewhere. I'm sure.
Pull up the old one.
Yeah.
So, and figure out how we get that out there. Yeah.
Speaking of the newspaper, could we arrange to, could we reach out to Kelly Bouchard or someone from the Forecaster and say, we would like to make sure that the content of this meeting gets out to the public? Or I think Forecaster articles are read by just about everybody. So if there was a way to condense this into some sort of article or interview.
That's it. 3 hours is short?
Well, if I don't speak, it'd be short.
I'm sure
on what they
we
write.
could alert her to this meeting.
Yeah, we have a reporter now that covers our district at the Forecaster. They didn't have anybody for a while, but they just hired someone like 2 months ago, and she already, we've already given her a couple stories, and they've been in the Forecaster. She's been willing to get those in there, so I think she's very good to work with, and is looking for information that we could provide. So if we can give her some sort of a condensed, and then she can take it from there, I think that would be great.
I would also recommend that the district Facebook page just maybe tomorrow says, hey, you want to watch that workshop? Here's the link. I mean, that's all we have to say is just, make sure people remember that this happened and that they can still go back and watch it and get all that information. It does take a while. It really helps to highlight like timestamps for people, which tonight was a little bit disjointed, but if we can say, the first half of the meeting, we're talking about the history of how we got here, and then we're talking about Gray Road, and then we're,
Relate it to the agenda and put timestamps right in there.
Yeah, exactly.
So I kind of feel like getting some PR help is top of the list. Do other people think that? They could help with making a webinar. They could help with putting together a handout with the talking points if we're going to go to meetings and be representatives, that here's the clean thing, the clean list of here's the key points, and sort of streamlining that message and keeping to the key points, as Dave has said also, so that things don't go off and get fragmented, that messaging. Would that help if we had that?
I think it would, I think it would help us know how best to put out the information.
I'm hearing lots of great ideas, but somebody's got to pull it together and
It's
form an agenda. And
capacity is what sells me. Just the added capacity. So long as it's not like a 6-week process to find the right person or firm.
This is
If this is
on the list.
quick and effective, I'm all for it. I agree the capacity would be very helpful. I think at a parallel time frame, we should start establishing this committee of people to start talking to.
That's a good point, Mike. This doesn't have to be like sequential, one thing after the other. We can be doing a whole bunch of things at once.
And one other thing I thought of, we've been having these, board goes to school, and we've talked to Jeff a few times about doing the parents go back to school. So at least Mabel so they could see what it's like. And I understand there's privacy issues. So here's my idea. Just hang with me for a minute. Those, just those cameras they have on
GoPro?
Yeah, and the dog's walking through and you get the dog's point of view. So what if you
totally
just
put a GoPro on my son.
Hang on here. So, you get one of those cameras and you put it on like some volunteer kid or something. So it's from their point of view. Not from an adult walking through or whatever. I'm seriously. And do it in a way that I don't know, Jeff, you tell the kids don't turn around, just like ignore this person or whatever. Make it subtle so they don't even know it's on the
No, I mean, I love it. I'm actually
and
loving
so they
that
can
idea.
see, like,
Kids are fun to-
here I am walking with the tray, and there's all these other kids who are bigger, and there's no space, and I've got to sit on the auditorium floor, and and go to the music room. But on the playground, and where you can't play 4 square, you have to play 2 square. It's so small.
I can think of a couple of kids
it's
already.
kind of nutty, but it would be a visual, and visuals help people understand.
That's
So,
brilliant.
Yeah. And no, I don't volunteer to do it.
What?
Yeah, I think that was what the video tried to do, but it was obviously on a different, kind of from a different
Yeah,
lens.
this is serious that we get this resolved, but a little levity can go a long way too.
I think that's where this PR person could help us too,
Yeah.
is to how to do it, the right way and cut all the clips out so that shouldn't be in there, but.
So are we looking to do an RFP for this?
For what, the PR? I guess. Is that what you would do?
That's my question. And based on the cost is whether we need to do an RFP or not.
Depending on the money of that.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm thinking of the help that we're asking for isn't enormous money, but I don't know. I mean, I'd like to hear proposals from a handful of companies, and then we just go with it. I think one of the other things that would be very helpful, and this board could work on, and people in the community could help with, is fleshing out that timeline, so that by the time we choose a PR firm, they can watch this video and they can look at that timeline and click on all these links, and they can hit the ground running and say, okay, we've got everything we need to put together a plan.
And if we're going to hire a professional, it would also be nice to ask them, just regaining some trust. Some people, the folks who were upset about the option, like, hey, we voted no. Why does the board get to then just say we're going to have the option on the land, or that kind of thing? It would be helpful to hear what recommendations to try to regain some of that trust.
I think that can be a line in the timeline with supporting arguments, like, why did we do that?
Yes. Yeah.
Just every one of those could link to its own little paragraph.
Mm-hmm.
I think,
Go ahead.
sorry. The one thing that I'm sort of just struggling with moving forward is if there really is another option for land. That being said, I do not like the thought of having to sink all of that time and money into evaluating a new site. But is there another site?
So the question is 80 Gray Road a bad site?
No.
I mean, I don't think so.
I
I
don't
don't
think
think so. Like, I feel comfortable moving forward with 80 Gray Road.
Second.
I feel comfortable moving forward with the concept design that we have. And I just want to make sure that I'm doing my due diligence, so.
Yeah. I feel like we've done it since 2019.
No, I know.
To
But like,
Dan's
I just,
point, I think right after, like 6 months ago, if we could have found like another 15 acres that was closer to infrastructure that might have saved $3 to $5 million, we might have said, okay, well that would be a reason for waiting. But now, from what I'm hearing, it sounds like we're giving up 6% just to inflation.
Yeah.
So the time, each time you take another 18 months, you lose all the infrastructure savings right there.
And there's always a surprise with a piece of property. Like, we got done with the whole design on the campus, and then we had some MDOT concerns that surfaced. So there's always a surprise. Well, we know what the surprises are at 80 Gray Road. Of course, there always can be something else, but we've already done the due diligence on that proproperty. It's we know what to expect.
On the property.
yeah.
Well, and we don't know if that was the reason for a failed referendum, was
Right.
the location. I'm more apt to feel that it's what we've heard. The other piece, it's the economy, and it was the fear factor around it. So, and I believe that truly.
Yeah.
So,
And we did an RFP in 2021 for land.
Yes, we
And
did.
So,
we did.
Yep.
And that's going in the timeline?
yeah. we
I
did.
think that, yes,
I
it
think
was in
that-
the timeline.
And then 2021 for land.
So when is our next meeting, Jeff?
Actually, you have, because it's the break coming up, it's March 6th, I think, is the next meeting.
So, is anybody going to object terribly if we put that on the agenda to nail down the location? Which would allow us to move forward.
I think
I would
Vanessa
support
was
that.
objecting.
As long as we really communicate that's going to be on the agenda. I think it's going to be big to make sure people know.
And we can do this, the
I
usual
didn't have
stuff
that.
that we do. We can ask the crier, the notes, we'll put in our newsletter, of course, we'll put on social media. Is there any other ways that people would like us to get it out?
Facebook post.
Yep, all social media,
Yeah.
we'll do that.
And the other thing that I'm struggling with the land, like, I feel due diligence that we should find another piece of land, but with a failed referendum, I would think that people know we still need a school, and that somebody would have come forth since the failed referendum until now
Agree.
and said, hey, I have 10 acres. I have, especially in this economy, because they want to unload and they want to maybe make some money or do some other investments. I would just think that somebody would have else come forward in this whole back and forth.
I also find it hard to believe that somebody that has land and that they want to sell hasn't already brought that to us.
True.
Can we put that in the Press Herald article that we're gonna put out prior to the March?
So the question is, do you want to open that door or not? So if you find a great piece of land, it has to be significantly better than 80 Gray Road, because you're kicking the can down the road 2 years and committing to another $250,000 to $350,000 in architect costs.
So a
That
great,
would go into the article.
a greater piece of land, I would see in my eyes, because I like to have parameters and rules, is same distance or closer, flatter,
Water, sewer.
water, sewer, accessibility, and we could put the same building on it.
That is a tall order.
No,
That would be
that's all
better.
correct, because that's the only way that
Next one
overcomes
should
6% increase.
Vanessa,
The building
that's,
needs a little
That would be
topography.
better.
No, no, that's, I mean, I agree
Tyler,
with you.
could we work that up? That's a great list. Like, what is it going to take for us to pivot away from 80 Gray Road?
That's actually a good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can.
Yeah, I would only want to, sorry, I would only want to move to a different property if we could like move pretty much our concept design
Yeah.
to it.
You pretty much nailed the list that I would come up with, because they're all the big ticket, eliminating an access road that's, a quarter of a mile, a water line extension for a mile of three-phase power for, up the road, sewer. I mean, those are the big things that would be kind of on the table.
And proximity.
Yep.
I mean, we were looking,
On the opposite side, like, I see that extra land and the wetlands as like educational, a nice thing. You know,
Yes.
so if another property doesn't have that, that's a downside to me.
It could be, yeah, I mean,
It's a
that's
beautiful
So
property.
who wants to work on
There's a
that
lot of
list,
community
making that list?
benefits for that site.
what list?
The list you just mentioned, who wants to
The one I
flesh
just
that
said.
out? and fine-tune it?
Vanessa's list.
Huh?
You want to rewind and,
I think you're gonna have a quote in the Press Herald article.
Do you want us to flush it out?
yeah.
Yep.
We're glad to take that.
Please.
What are you glad to take? Scott?
Flushing out the land, and what we would need to have is
Our parameters.
parameters
for a better
around-
piece
Gonna
of
take
land.
for us
around
to
a different
pivot
piece
away
of
from that.
property and to pivot away from the 80 Gray Road.
I think Tyler
What that would look like.
probably has already got Vanessa's ideas, and looks like he's working it up
And,
right
and
over
lay
there.
out the
Yeah.
Did you just
downsides
write
also.
that?
2 years additional, 250,
years.
350
I think that's
thousand
very
dollars
important.
additional.
Those are
Yeah.
important
Let's talk.
pieces that
Yeah.
we have to allow people to know that, because that's almost going to be presented on March 6th prior
Yeah.
to. All that information, those are really key points.
Well, we all know what the big numbers were, right?
Am I wrong in wanting
Yes.
to answer this question sooner rather than later so that we can have a path
Let's
forward?
answer it.
Well, if in the timeline that you're going to put out, right, you're going to clean all this up and put a timeline out,
Me?
and a link
No,
to it.
somebody down there.
Somebody down there, a timeline out. In that timeline, if you'd really make it very clear what the due diligence, that it was done, when, how. They looked at this, they looked at that, they looked at this. That's why they landed on 80 Gray Road. If people have that somewhere they can go and look at, I think that will move some people.
I feel like you have that information on like the property, right, you looked at, yes. And if, what we could do is link that in, any sort of things we can link right into this
Yeah,
document.
we'd want to clean it up a little bit, but I mean, we have the 3 sites that we started with back in 2019 with Sharpsfield and was it Styles? And
Styles
then-
Way, yeah.
Yeah, Memorial. We have we have the ad, we have taken a look at, I think it was one parcel on 9 and 15. We have the one that we looked at up the street. We have the 80 Gray Road. We have
The one on Blanchard with the windmill.
Yeah, that's the one that.
Stiles is next to the railroad tracks.
One
We
next
have,
to the railroad tracks,
Lost,
correct.
yeah.
we have one on Blanchard that was, we
Small
looked at, I
correct.
think. Yeah, so I've got the timeline of all those different things, and I've got a summary of what we did on each one of these sites to evaluate them.
Yes.
Perfect. Jeff, I don't know if, do I own that doc or do you? Can you?
You do.
Okay, so we can share that doc to everybody here,
Great.
and there's no reason why you guys can't make
I can
notes
share.
right in it, and we can
Yep.
flesh that out. That needs to be the comprehensive document that we work to, and everything is linked from, and eventually becomes a web page.
And can we add some future dates as well? I know we have the timeline that was put together for, if the school would have passed, what would be the open date? And, I want to show some realistic options in the future.
if we do a new
if the
land.
vote is here,
Okay.
Yep.
So take a look at different referendum dates, and then what would happen if we pivoted to a different parcel? Is that what you're asking?
In our timeline history document, I think she's just talking about, here's where we would have opened the doors, but now we're not,
And then
showing
what the,
If we done the
The
concept on
impact.
this
Okay.
property, where it would be.
because I think that also really helps illustrate the point we have around the property at hand, 80 Gray Road, and, being able to find a future referendum date and what that open date versus, having to start over and how much time that really does add.
Yeah.
I think having a brief presentation on the 6th, why 80 Gray Road? I mean, it's almost kind of like you've got to answer that question and then vote on it and then have that information all in one place so people can, and then we link that into this document that I just shared with you.
And so do others also agree that this could be helpful at this point to have a Press Herald article as a summary of this meeting and what we're looking forward to? I don't want this to be a surprise that this vote is happening on March 6th.
Yeah, I mean, we can get it out. I think, I will tell you, our newsletter submission rate has gone up markedly since the vote.
Oh, good.
We've put it out that we put it in the crier in the notes, linked to we've had a lot of people, we've gained a lot of subscribers. But we also put it in the crier in the notes, any information that we want. But I think a forecaster article, the Press Herald picks up all the forecaster articles. So if we focused on the forecaster. it
Sorry,
might be
that's
better.
kind of what I meant when I said Press Herald, the forecaster.
Well, we could probably also ask to council and select board if they could note it at their next meeting, that, oh, by the way, the school board's gonna be voting on it on the 6th.
That's a good idea.
I think directing people back to this recorded workshop is top of the list, like, please absorb everything that we talked about here, and then everybody's on the same page, sort of.
And then if we really do put it out and people understand that's what's happening, we could also see who may come to make comment, right?
Okay, I think we have a rough plan. PR, finding a PR company to help is number one. Timeline and fleshing out that timeline, we could all help with that document, filling that in, and then linking to the supporting documents. PR firm will use that. We'll look to a vote on March 6th with Jeff communicating that very well.
Should we have the timeline, like a due date that everybody looks in, makes their edits, and then finalize so we can get it on the website or up as soon as possible?
And with also February break coming up and acknowledging, right?
Yeah, I was just curious, instead of having it never, like, not an end date, like maybe by the 22nd of February.
It can also be, it would be good just to have a link, kind of like the FAQs, where we can go in and continuously update to.
Okay.
And then we can do what we did with the FAQs and just say, updated as of, and just, make sure people know what date it's current if we want to do that. But I think having a date would be helpful, because I'd like to have Melissa go in and
Clean it up.
format, clean
Yeah.
up, stuff like that.
So maybe have it done by
13th, 20th.
22nd, and that gives the public a week in a couple days, or
Uh,
sooner,
Sure.
17th?
It's
That which
Friday.
Friday? I know.
You're in some sort of rush, Vanessa.
I just like deadlines, like,
Let's
oh
say
my
this, we
God.
get it to a point that's good enough to post, and this is a
Okay.
working document that we'll continue to add to.
I like February 22nd.
Okay, so February 22nd, Vanessa likes very much.
I like deadlines.
So we will pick that as a random day to have that ready to post. All right, so that's your assignment. All of you work on that, fill it in, flesh it out. And then we get a link to the supporting documentation, which Tyler can help with and Jeff and Scott can help with.
I shared it with you too, Tyler.
Yep, that'd be great.
So if you can directly link, that's great. Anything in there?
I mean, this may not go to referendum for another year, but at least we're getting the information out.
It's better to do it quicker
Yeah.
than lose the momentum.
Plus, if I don't have it
Okay.
written, I don't-
Somebody try to be at town council.
Say again?
Should somebody try to be at Cumberland Town Council? They meet on February 27th, and then whenever, I don't know when the select
of
board
theirs.
meets. And I say this as I literally can't because it's my son's birthday, so I'm not volunteering. Sorry, I would otherwise.
Well, I know select
Bring him.
board, they meet over February break. And then they don't meet until the 7th of March.
Yeah, they're asking
So-
for more communication as well and overlap and just going and doing regular updates, so it's sort of separate from the new school. We also have to discuss that and how's the best way to make sure that, you know, whatever we want to communicate to them, we're doing consistently. So,
I think and ask on that committee, one of them to be sitting on that school.
I definitely think that one of them should be on the committee for help.
Or they can select a member from their community or
yeah.
selectmen to be on that committee.
Oh, I very much want
Yeah.
members from each board to be
Yeah, we had
our
Kate and Shirley, right, from North Yarmouth and
previously, yep,
Cumberland, yeah.
phase one, yep.
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 I personally, that's easier for us if they are on that committee and communicate back, but that's separate from also they're looking for more regular updates in their meetings, and that's something Jeff and I have to talk about and try to, somebody's got to attend and then just do an update.
Yeah, I mean, I've
think
usually done
Tom
a budget update every year. Most years they've asked.
Yeah. I think the point of this, though, is really to have more exposure to the school board, so we're not just coming to council and select board when we're asking for money or talking about the budget. So we're like having an opportunity to, you know, really showcase what's happening in the district, all the good things, all the feel-good stuff.
Yep. Maybe we should take your superintendent report and include some of that. That would be.
We've sent it to the crier and notes now, but yeah, if anyone, I mean, I think ideas about how to get that information out and how can, I think also having the towns feel comfortable with that approach. You know, what makes sense consistently.
Okay. Anything else on new school for the workshop tonight, here, now? Nope. Okay. Public comment we had and we closed. Very much appreciate Dave being here. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you, Christina.
Second.
Second.
Thank you, Mike. I'll take. And discussion, all in favor? Unanimous motion carries. Thank you.
Leanne wanted
very
to
much.
discuss that.
Hold on.